Before we begin with a formal welcome, we'll begin with an acknowledgement. And I will ask if Richard Lopez Perez, Sarah Jefferson, and Dami Hannon from the Native American and Indigenous Alliance could join us up on stage. They are hosting the spring powwow that has come back after several years of absence later today. And I hope you'll join them in front of Merton Hall at the Merton lawn, just a 5-minute walk on this campus. Later today, I'll be heading over there with the kids. So thank you so much for giving the acknowledgement this morning.
Good morning, everyone. And I first, on behalf of all of NIA, as the president currently, I want to give a big thank you, first of all, to Ben Mansky for inviting us out here and being part of this summit. I think it's a very good, effort. It's a very good initiative to try and build a better and more thoughtful, community and general area for everyone up here in NOVA. And now, I guess just a little bit about ourselves. So, of course, as he said, we're the Native American Indigenous Alliance. We focus a lot on kind of just bringing out and informing people about the fact that, first of all, Indigenous people exist everywhere here in the Western Hemisphere, and just kind of bring out the beauty of the culture. Part of that is today with our powwow. So if you can make it out after this summit, that'd be amazing. We're going to actually have to leave a bit early for that, but that's fine. For myself, I am a person of Indigenous heritage, and I'm trying to research and reconnect with that as a person from Puerto Rico, trying to reconnect to Taino roots. But everyone kind of has a different story, and it's just a nice, big, huge, and happy community. But now I'm going to move on to our other officers here and our future co-presidents so they can give our mission statement and land acknowledgement. Thank you for having us.
Hi, I'm Dami. So we are dedicated to assisting Native American Indigenous students transition to college, promoting Indigenous culture, raising awareness of Native issues, and providing a safe environment for Native and non-Native students. We are committed to decolonization, community building, and ending environmental racism.
So hi everyone, my name is Sarah, and I also am of Native American heritage. I'm part of the Chickahominy tribe out of Virginia, which is in Charles City, which is about 25 minutes east of Richmond, and if any of y'all know where that is. And so I'll be reading the land acknowledgement, which basically is just to help raise awareness of the lands in which Mason and other institutions are built on. So, land acknowledgement engages all present in an ongoing Indigenous protocol to enact a meaningful, reciprocal relationship with ancestors, contemporary tribal nations, and their intergenerational life sources sustaining us. Land acknowledgement is more than a statement. It is a formal commitment to action. We give greetings and thanksgivings to the sacred Potomac riverlands, waters, and non-human beings. To the ancestors, the Dogue people annihilated in colonial Virginia's violent campaigns against them that ripped open homelands to destruction and brutal enslavement of our African American kin. To our close living relatives stewarding their homelands, the recognized Virginia tribes, Pamunkey, Patawomeck, Rappahannock, Mattaponi, Upper Mattaponi, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Nansemond, Nottoway, and Monacan for the 13th generation. To our relatives, Indigenous Turtle Islanders across North, Central, and South America who followed the corn pollen trail here, by choice or in diaspora, to create community with us. To our extended human family, carrying the diversity and beauty of all people, who are with us in good conscience and anxious on the road to our matriation. We affirm Indigenous sovereignty more broadly in commitment to increasing awareness of historical legacies of Indigenous dispossession, while actively working to dismantle practices of erasure that perpetuate these oppressive legacies in the present. We also pay our respects to Indigenous elders past, present, and future, to those who have stewarded their communities and land throughout the generations. Thank you.
We appreciate you taking the time to come and join us for this morning as you're setting up for the powwow this afternoon and making that happen, and for sharing those words. I also want to thank all of you who are here, all the volunteers who have been helping out this weekend, who I made the mistake of not acknowledging the program, so I apologize for that, but just want to let you know it's deeply appreciated. I want to thank organizations and centers here at the university and the community that have put forward a significant effort in helping to make this first event of the DNOVA project possible. And in fact, when I think about it, this is the first in-person event I've been involved in organizing of any kind of scale in several years. So it's thank you for stepping forward, everybody, and lending a hand. The Center for Social Science Research really grounding the DNOVA project, the Institute for Sustainable Earth, Next System Studies at Mason, the Democracy Collaborative, a long-term partner based in the community. I want to thank Fairfax Public Access and GMU TV for filming and bringing what's happening here to many more people. It's really important. And I especially also want to thank the Virginia Asian Chamber of Commerce and Virginia Asian Foundation for feeding us and just coming forward to offer to do that today. So when we eat lunch, just be aware that they step forward. And this is the kind of community building that we're engaged in here. So thank you. Thanks to all of you. So my name is Ben Mansky. I am Assistant Professor of Public Sociology here at George Mason University. And I am the Director of Next System Studies, which is a new project of which the Democratizing NOVA project is really our first sort of major effort. And I'm going to be saying a few words just to welcome you today, to set the stage, and then to introduce our keynote speaker. So I'll get started with that. And as I've been working on Democratizing NOVA, which we only began the work on that project just a year ago, actually, on Earth Day of 2021. When I think about this project, it's a project that's guided by a vision of a Northern Virginia and of a DMV that is somewhat different from the one that we inhabit today. It's a region that is a home to a rapidly expanding cooperative sector in which ownership and management of the workplace, of our community institutions, of transportation, of all the things that people need to have a good life is increasingly in the hands of the people who do the work, who live here, and who sustain our communities. It's a place that has already made the transition to a fossil-free future. And so the question for DNOVA in terms of getting to that kind of a place, and we all have our own visions and our purpose in coming here today together, is to get a sense of those visions and of the work that people are doing to identify the initiatives that are already underway here in Northern Virginia, to look for places for linkage, to look for places where people can come together and build new projects that are needed. You know, this is a step along the way, right? It's an important step, and we're all part of that here. I want to say a little bit about the project that DNOVA is a part of. It's a project of building next system studies in higher education. Here, as with so many important initiatives historically, higher education is following the lead of people and communities. That was true in the 1960s and 1970s, and the mass movements that led to the founding of third world studies, of African American studies, of Asian American studies, of feminist studies, of all the areas of study that came out of that period, of environmental studies. It's true today as well. There are all kinds of initiatives that we collectively embody here and that millions of people are working towards across North America and tens of millions worldwide, perhaps more, that can be considered next system initiatives. But for the university, I would say that next system studies is based on a series of theses, right? A certain set of assumptions about what the next 10 to 20 years will bring. And those include the idea that although we have lived through some very difficult times and continue to expect that things will be rough in the 2020s, this is a period in which I think there's a sense of great capacity, but also there's a seriousness to this period. That it's not a period in which we're expecting that we're facing immediate collapse. This is what Garl Perovitz calls a period of punctuated decline or punctuated stagnation. So what this means is that we have time, we have space in which to build something new, right? And that structures our research, it structures the organizing, the entrepreneurship, the other kinds of initiatives in our communities. Of course, there are things in the world that are accelerating the crisis, the climate crisis, the pace of technological change are accelerating the pressures on all of us, even as we're thinking about building a new kind of political economy. Together, these necessitate a new system with new logics and eventually a new equilibrium. So that's to say, when I say necessitate, that doesn't mean that we want it to happen. It just means that it will happen. There will be a new system. And the question really becomes, and this, I will skip ahead to number 6 here. The question becomes, what kind of system do we want? Right? What kind of system will achieve and deliver the kinds of things that collectively all the people of Northern Virginia, all the people of this country want and need, right? And that's what Next System Studies are about. And you'll be hearing a fair bit about the work of our Next System Fellows, of interns, of people here at the university today. And so I'm looking forward to that very much. I sort of sum some of this up. Another way to think about Next System Studies is it involves 3 questions. Questions of system design. What kind of system do we need to create? System change, which is another way of saying how might we get there? And of systemic movements. What must we do to get there? So I'm going to get to brass tacks here. And we have been building here at Mason. We've been building not only the Democratizing NOVA initiative, but also curricular offerings in the form of courses and a new program called the Next System Fellows at Arlington. And you will see some of these folks here today in various sessions. But we have Jasmine, Camilo, Gabe, and Kristen. And let's see, not everybody's at that table. Some folks are outside. And then Lupe, Clay, Jimena, and James, who you will be meeting over the course of this weekend. And some of them will be presenting some of their work today. So it's been wonderful to work with all of you this semester and with my colleague John Dale over there. In terms of projects, we do have a number of these initiatives beyond the Next System Fellows that we've been working to get off the ground. And we're here for Democratizing NOVA, for this community engaged research project that's about building partnerships for a transition to a democratic, equitable, and sustainable Northern Virginia. But we do have other initiatives that we are getting off the ground, and I just want to let you know about them. One of those is a platform cooperative built on distributed ledger technology in the spatial web for the region, for the DMV. And this interlinks nicely with the DNOVA project. So basically, why should the Amazons and the social media giants of the world dominate technology sector that was actually created by technologists, by workers, by people who are looking to solve real problems, right? Let's harness this technology to make a political economy that's accountable to the people possible here. Let's do it here. We have a new project in participatory constitutional design that we're working with Move to Amend and various other community-based organizations nationally. Here's an image from Chile, which has gone through its participatory constitutional process and inspired many here in the US. And then finally, we have an effort to build the Next System Studies Association. So George Mason University taking a lead in doing that. So that's a little bit of the context from the standpoint of, from my standpoint, in terms of what brings us here together today. And the rest of the day is about hearing from each other and learning about what's possible here in the region, as I said. For Next System Studies, there are a number of terrains that we pay attention to. And those terrains might be categorized as falling into the terrain of history more broadly, and then the terrain of emerging projects, right? So a lot of what we've talked about so far involves emerging projects, emerging initiatives, looking to cases around the world, whether they're here in the US, like Cooperation Jackson, Cooperation Humboldt, Cooperation Buffalo, the Center for Economic Democracy, the Boston Ujima Project, the Cleveland Project, and the Evergreen Cooperatives, the cooperative sector in my home state of Wisconsin, looking to those kinds of things that are happening and studying them in real time and learning from them and making them visible to one another and building bridges, right? So that's very important. But the terrain of history is also incredibly important. And history is always here with us. History is always informing us, even when we don't necessarily know that it is doing that, right? And there's a deep history of the cooperative movement here in Virginia and in the South, and it's a very significant history. So when we're thinking about who should keynote this first event, we reached out to somebody who is, without question, sort of the person who has done the most to unearth this history, to bring it forward, to inspire, as a result, action all over the United States. The number of people that I have run into in the last several years who have said, have you read Collective Courage? I've been on conference calls where this comes up repeatedly, right? Has been really impressive. And this is actually the text that we use to begin the Next System Studies seminar, Social Change in the Next System. And it's a very important grounding. Jessica Gordon-Nemhart is Professor of Community Justice and Social Economic Development at the Department of Africana Studies at John Jay College of the City University of New York. She's an affiliate scholar at the Center for the Study of Cooperatives at the University of Saskatchewan in Canada, incidentally, where my aunt and uncle have been since my aunt followed a draft dodger to Canada a long time ago. So I've been to Regina. Actually, if you read her bio, there's a long history of work with all kinds of center for cooperatives all over the United States. So she's a political economist by training with degrees from University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and Yale, PhD, master's, obviously. Has written many articles, not only on the history of the cooperative sector and cooperative movement, but also on projects that are ongoing. But we're here today to talk about the theme of this text of collective courage, to learn from the examples of history, and also to tie the lessons from that to our projects today. So I ask you to please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Jessica Gordon-Nemhart.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very excited to participate. Thanks. And sorry, I'm a little distracted. This is, I think, my first public speaking since COVID, and I'm trying to keep my 100-year-old father from germs. So that's why I'm staying away from everybody and trying to stay back and germ-free, so excuse me for that. But thanks for being here. Thanks, I don't know if they're still here, the land and water acknowledgement. Yes, excellent, thanks. I usually, let's see if I can get this. Yeah, I usually do one also, but I forgot about water, so I'm gonna start adding water now into mine, since it is so important. Thanks to the organizers, I'm really glad you were able to do this, and hopefully many more. And then also I always like to acknowledge ancestors, my own ancestors, your ancestors, invited them into the space to support us in all that we're doing. I always want to remember for mine, those who were enslaved, those who continue to labor without just compensation, those who practice resistance, especially through solidarity and collective economics. I also want to just in general recognize the struggles of all those combating anti-Blackness, racism, patriarchy, environmental degradation, etc., and also acknowledge any elders. And yesterday was Earth Day, so that's another reason to add the water issue. But I just wanted to remind us of Earth Day as well. So we're at a crossroads. I think we're starting to move toward the right fork in the road. But I wanted to remind you of something W.E.B. Du Bois, who hopefully you all know, a respected African-American scholar. But also, if you read my book, you know he was a proponent of cooperatives as an economic development strategy, especially for Black liberation. And he held a conference, I think it was one of the first conferences on Black co-ops in Atlanta in 1907. And the final statement from the conference is, well, paraphrased what's on the screen there. We unwittingly stand hesitating at the crossroads, one way leading to the old trodden ways of grasping fierce, individualistic competition to get wealth at the expense of the general well-being. The other way leading to cooperation in capital and labor, the massing of small savings, the wide distribution of capital, and a more general equality of wealth and comfort. So that was 115 years ago he said that, but I think we're still at that crossroads. I think we've been at that crossroads for 115 years, right? A few of us, some of us venture one way, too many of us venture the other way. And here we are again, and I think especially since COVID, more people are willing to sort of try the way of amassing wide distribution of capital and a more general equality of wealth and comfort, but we're still hesitating, right? And so hopefully this conference and the work you all do and will do will help us to move more toward that. And, you know, he's actually said these things in other eloquent ways too, but I just want us to think about the terminology, right? More general equality, wealth, and comfort. So I usually talk to my students about community well-being, right? That we're in it for the general well-being, community well-being, right? Cooperation and capital and labor. So often in his lifetime, they talked more about consumer cooperatives, but he had labor in there. So he had a notion about worker cooperatives and producer cooperatives also. So I think we, what's the word? We should be more proactive, right? It's been too long that we've been standing at these crossroads, and so let's figure out ways that we can get ourselves over. So for me, cooperative solidarity economics are a community economic development tool as well as an economic justice tool. So they serve multiple purposes, which is another reason why they're such a great tool, right? So they, you know, in economics, we talk about market failure, right? When the market doesn't produce something. And hopefully you all know at this point that capitalist markets produce very little for the general well-being of human beings. And so we're always in market failure as far as I'm concerned, and people of color are always in market failure because the markets don't work for us and are meant not to work for us. So cooperatives help to address that, help to address underdevelopment, economic isolation, marginality, and on the positive side, to help to increase affordable goods and services, access to affordable goods and high quality goods and services, right? So they're also an anti-poverty strategy and a community building strategy. They help us to anchor and stabilize the local economy, which is another reason why I got excited when I first started learning about cooperatives. And they practice economic democracy, which of course is essential if we're thinking about what the next system is. And so what do we mean? What do I mean by economic democracy? I mean economic decisions and activity are people-centered rather than profit-centered. It's a grassroots economic framework based on solidarity and cooperation. We want to reduce hierarchy. We want to reduce dominance. We want to have multiple voices heard, multiple stakeholders participating together, right? And also workers and invisible laborers, right? We want them to have the voice, right? Them to be able to say what's happening in the economy, what kind of activity we should be doing, how much it should cost, how they're going to work together, what they should get paid, what should happen, right? So the democracy really isn't just about us as consumers, but it's really about us as consumers and workers, and having our say on both sides in terms of how we're going to socially reproduce ourselves and what's the economics that's going to bring us to that. And so then, of course, the goal, right, economic democracy is a strategy, right? The goal is justice, right? And what some of us are now calling the economics of abundance, right? We want economics not to be about scarcity, but about abundance, what we can create together to perfect our humanness and to allow our humanness, right, and allow Mother Earth to flourish, right? And so that's what economics should be about. So that's the goal, right? Economic exchanges and distributions are fair and equitable. The most number of people benefit and distributed abundantly. We eliminate exploitation and inequality, eliminate poverty, eliminate private monopoly and dominance of businesses that seek profit at the expense of human need. We want to build economies based on human values, the needs of society, eliminate need, enable prosperity for all, and that would get us to this human perfectibility and community well-being. So cooperatives, I don't know if I need to, I'll kind of fast forward on what they are. You can ask me if those of you who don't know what they are, but I think most of you here probably know already, right? Jointly owned companies, value-based, created to satisfy a need, governed through democratic economic participation, sharing risk, and sharing the surplus and the profits. During the year of cooperatives, 2012, oops, that didn't, the NCBA, National Cooperative Business Association here in the US, had a little contest on what makes your co-op rock. And then they put together this poster, the 10 reasons why co-ops rock. I'm not gonna go through it all. Hopefully you guys can look at the visual quickly, but a lot of this stuff I already said is in there. The other piece that's important, especially for economists and economic development, is the lower failure rates of cooperatives, right? Most people don't realize or don't recognize how precarious business development is, and small businesses and especially actually fail, right? Most small businesses, about 60 to 80% of them fail in the first year. Cooperatives, only 10% fail in the first year. After 5 years in business, 90% of co-ops are still operating. Usually only 3 to 5 traditional businesses are still operating. So co-ops are actually a better viable business model if you look at it in that way. And if you think about all the things we just talked about, all the components, right? Membership, economic participation, democratic decision-making, all those things about being human and about making decisions together actually help the co-ops to have better longevity. We also know that co-ops survive crises better and actually are often created during a crisis, because the crisis, again, is that market failure, an excessive market failure, and we need a different model, and co-ops fill those gaps and fill those alternatives. So even in crises, co-ops are a better model and often develop out of the crises. And then, of course, the universality of co-ops. I guess it was 20 years ago now, maybe longer, when I first started studying about cooperatives and thinking about them as a community economic development strategy. People told me, Black people as well as white people told me that Black people didn't do co-ops. And there was this weird mythology, in the Black communities, there was a notion that co-ops were just sort of hippie food stores. They didn't realize that credit unions were co-ops. They didn't recognize other kinds of co-ops or know about them. And in the white community, there's just sort of more ignorance than anything else. Never made sense to me. I didn't understand why people talked about cooperative movements starting with the Rochdales in England. When I started studying it and then started learning more about solidarity economics, I realized that really solidarity economics, economic cooperation, and even official co-op businesses are universal. They're not just what Europeans do. They're not just what lefties do, right? And in fact, if you think about it, co-ops are actually the first kind of economic activity, the first method of economic survival from hunting and gathering, right? Hunting and gathering was always done with a group of people together and sharing, right? So really what happened with capitalism is that it alienated us from our notions of cooperation and collective work and responsibility. And it's time for us to what's the word? Gosh, I'm getting old here. To de-alienate ourselves. That's not the word I was looking for, but that's the word that's coming up, right? So it's time for us to reunite ourselves with, right? Unite our humanity with our economics. And that's, to me, what co-ops and solidarity economics does. And that's what the vision and the mission of the next system is, right? To reunite us with our humanity through our economics. Because so much, if you think about it, so much of our waking hours, right, are in these very hierarchical, exploitative jobs and work. And so therefore, most of our life is about being exploited or exploiting others, when really as human beings, that's not what we're about and that's not what our mission is. So why shouldn't we recreate economics for the mission of human perfectibility, right, and developing human beings? So that's really indigenous societies have always had that notion of the collective and the commons and the stewardship for the next generations, right? Early African civilizations have used co-ops, and then throughout the world, all groups have used co-ops. So we need to think of it more as a universal strategy. And then Ben already gave a plug for my book, so I won't say too much about that, but there also is a study I helped to do on current Latinx co-ops. That's the website there if you're interested in that study. We could probably show it to you later if you need to write it down or something. But I realized I'm going too long, so I wanted to get to some examples and then time for question and answers. So I covered hundreds of mutual aid societies, Black communal towns, examples of formal and informal economic cooperation from about 1780 to 2013 in African American communities. There's lots of similar activity going on in all other communities in the US, but my interest was to look at what was happening in African American communities. I found about 162 legally incorporated cooperative enterprises, meaning once the US actually had laws for how to incorporate as a co-op. That's what I mean by legally incorporated co-ops, and that would have been the late 1800s when we finally had the laws. And then also Du Bois, in his study, his 1907 study that he did for that conference, he found 20 credit unions and 154 co-ops that are separate from the ones that I found. So not a huge universe, but enough to show that there's a legacy and a history here. The other thing I wanted to mention, because it was, I realized it after I sort of put the book together, it turns out there are about 3 periods, and I think now we're probably entering a 4th period, that were the most prolific, especially for African American co-ops, but I think probably for co-ops in general in the US. So it's the 1880s, 1930s and 40s, and the 1960s and 70s. So what was similar about those periods, which will also help us to understand why I think we're in a period now and how that can help us move forward, right? First, survival needs, especially 1880s and the 1930s, right? 1930s was the Great Depression. 1880s was the end of Reconstruction, the beginning of white supremacist terrorism and Jim Crow segregation. And also the 1880s was a time of some economic challenges, which is usually one of the reasons why we end up with more racial repression during economic challenges. The 60s and 70s, the economy was better, so the survival wasn't as much, but there were active periods of racial consciousness and transition, just like the 1880s. So the 60s and 70s were similar to 1880s in terms of the racial consciousness raising and those activities. 1880s and 1960s were also similar in the need for economic independence, for political activism, for civil rights. A lot of civil rights workers in both those time periods found that when they were active, the mainstream economy retaliated against them and fired them or took their land away and things like that. And so there was a need for the co-op movement in both those periods. And then all 3 periods I found really fascinating. But when strong Black organizations were promoting cooperative alternatives and co-op education, that also it helps to explain periods of proliferation. And all 3 periods actually had very strong Black organizations promoting co-op development, even though, again, the history was a little bit lost and silent. So I want to focus on a couple of examples from those periods, but in general, to let you know the accomplishments, right, where the goods, quality goods and services get provided, cost savings, which then allowed increasing incomes and wealth. The co-ops were actually used to combat racism, and you'll see some examples of that in a minute. They also increased economic stability and Black self-sufficiency. They saved and created jobs in communities. They provided independence and self-determination and developed leadership, which is also something I didn't realize. I should have noticed it as a political economist, but I didn't realize it till I interviewed the then executive director of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives about 15 or 20 years ago. And he was reminding me about all the leadership that gets developed when people are engaged in the co-op movement and in co-ops. Also, my children say I'm too much of a Pollyanna, so I try to put in a little bit about the barriers, but I figured I'll put it in now so we can focus on the successes before I finish. So barriers, some of the normal barriers to economic development and business development, but also some of the barriers are related to being co-ops in a capitalist world, right? So capitalization, access to capital, adequate and proper orientation and training. It turns out the education piece, both the formal and the informal education, is really important, and you'll hear me talk about that over and over again, and you can ask me more about that. But learning all the aspects, including co-op management, education for democratic management, are important. Distrust and excessive competition have also been a barrier. Ideology, especially capitalist and individualistic ideology, are a barrier. Class and class politics and policies. So policies that, are more in favor of capitalism and things like that. And then racism and patriarchy in general, especially for the Black co-ops, have been a barrier. And the history of sabotage has really been, and that's part of why I think we knew so little about the Black co-ops, is because of the range of sabotage against them, both financial and physical sabotage, especially by white competitors and white supremacists who did not want these examples to work, did not want Blacks to show that they could do something together outside of the normal system and outside of the exploitation they were experiencing. And so there's huge racial and economic discrimination against the co-ops. Co-op members even being terrorized and lynched, co-ops being burned down, things like that. In addition to smaller sabotages like banks refusing to give lines of credit to Black co-ops, that kind of thing. Railroads refusing to move their products, that kind of thing. So a huge range of sabotage throughout the history, including up into the 21st century. We can find examples of some of these sabotages, but also still this long legacy of persistence, resistance, and persistence, so that any decade in US history, I can show you where there were some African-American cooperatives being pursued. And as I said, education was the key. So even in the face of all those kind of sabotages, both the internal education of educating the members of the co-op about why they're doing it, how to run a co-op and what they're doing in the co-op, and then the public education for the people outside. It turns out that the co-ops that had stronger community support lasted and survived some of the sabotage. And so making sure your community knows what you're doing, understands, is a part of the project, the program, makes a huge difference. And then for the Black history, they actually use study groups. Most of the co-ops I found, especially in the 20th century, that I knew anything about how they were started with a study group, learning with each other, learning together, learning from other people who had done it before, and moving forward together because of the collective learning. Using literature about co-ops, trying to find those few things that were written by Blacks about co-ops, but also using the traditional co-op literature. And then again, having Black organizations that were saying, let's do co-ops, let's study co-ops, let's do this. And I think I said this already, a response to economic discrimination and marginalization. So let me move to the examples. So one of the other really surprising things for me was to find in the 1880s that co-op development was actually intricately connected to populism and the labor movement, the growing labor movement in the 1880s. So the populism was about small farmers and landowners coming together to demand the same rights as the growing large agribusinesses and things like that, right? And so sort of the little man, the little person movement. Labor unions were obviously about labor, but not just urban labor as we think of now for labor unions, but they were also organizing farm labor. And the most progressive were actually working with small farmers and farm labor, so there wasn't a fight with landowners and laborers, and at least for small farmers. So that was a connection. And then the other interesting thing, right, I just said that the 1880s were a time when the Jim Crow US apartheid started, right? But these labor unions were actually recognizing that white and Black workers needed to stand together. And so again, the progressive labor unions at this period with the Populist Party were very integrated. They did not want to divide labor. They wanted to connect everybody, including women, Black, white, Latinx, et cetera. And so these movements were extremely progressive. And in addition, they were promoting co-op development, worker co-ops in particular, and farm co-ops, because they also realized that the way for labor to really get control and to be in direct control of themselves was through co-ops. So really interesting, by the early 1900s, this coalition of forces is totally torn apart and broken. The labor unions become much more urban and white, right? Populist movement kind of dies and the co-op movement sort of dies and has to revise itself later. So, but what happened during the 1880s? Richmond, Virginia, not exactly Northern Virginia, but still in this state, a fascinating project happens with the Knights of Labor. They create the Working Men's Reform Party in Richmond. In 1885, they run a political campaign to take control over the city council. They organized Black and white chapters of the Knights of Labor. This is Virginia as Jim Crow is starting, so the white and Black chapters actually can't meet together. They have to meet in separate buildings, in separate rooms, but they're able still to do a joint strategy, which was to promote integrated labor, organized labor, women's work, and co-ops into a strategy. They run this political party as well. They win control over the city council, and their platform was that they wanted the rebuilding of the city hall in Richmond to not be with convict labor, but with unionized, integrated labor and worker co-op construction companies. So they win control of the city council, and they're able to rebuild Richmond City Hall with that kind of a labor force. So really fascinating process, again, where you can see all the politics, the economics, the social, all coming together in one. Also here in Virginia, 1901, the Oddfellows Lodge establishes what's called the Mercantile Cooperative Company in Ruthville, Virginia. They start a co-op grocery and supply store, sell shares at $5 each that people can buy in installments. Since $5 is a little bit steep maybe in 1901, but you could pay it over time so you could afford it. They were able to buy a truck that they then shared with their members to get produce from the farms to the co-op. They actually built a school, an independent Black school. They flourished for about 20 years, which is actually a pretty long time for some of the examples that I found. And the study that I found about this also remarked about how important the whole ecosystem that gets created because of this one co-op existing over those 20 years and all the things that they were able to do. They created this ecosystem of local solidarity and support. It actually helped the Black community to prosper during those 20 years. So when you look at the data for what was happening with Blacks in those years, the Blacks around the region that the co-op was in had a faster rate of growth than the white community, and some of the white community actually moved out of that area, and so there was very strong Black development and Black growth and Black economic stability, and that also led to that area was a place that fought very rigorously when Virginia did not want to desegregate schools in 1954. That area was very strong in fighting back to make sure the schools got desegregated. And the research by this guy, Craig, said that he thinks that whole 20-year history of cooperative activity led to that strength of that Black community. So another interesting example. I wanted to give a DC example because I think there's some DC people here. Great Depression. 1936, there's a co-op, a self-help co-op in Lincoln Heights, DC, which eventually calls itself Cooperative Industries of DC. They had another name earlier, Northeast Co-op, I think. They're a producer co-op of unemployed, unskilled workers and homemakers, so mostly Black women doing sewing, canning, and brooms, so pretty much a worker co-op, which was relatively rare in those days. They finally got some federal funding because during FDR's period, there was a self-help grant program out of the Department of Commerce. They finally, after 2 years, got that money that enabled them to buy a farm. So they became what we now would call a hybrid or multi-stakeholder co-op. They had a farm, they had these worker co-ops and consumer co-op in terms of bringing the farm produce to the city and that kind of thing. So another really interesting co-op, again, out of need in the Great Depression. Another Depression era co-op that was really fascinating is Red Circle Cooperative, again in Richmond. So you see Richmond has this really interesting co-op history. I just recently wrote an article about that I think is coming out in some New Left magazine. I'm not sure it's out yet, but anyway, I highlight what was happening through Virginia's history with Black co-ops. In this case, somebody from the Richmond Urban League had visited a co-op in Gary, Indiana, came back talking about it. So they start their own co-op with a membership drive, an education program. Within a year, they go from 35 members to 125. They did study tours. They went around to other places around the country that had Black co-ops already to learn about them. They were boycotting a grocery store because it wouldn't hire any Blacks and was unfriendly to Black usage. So they actually opened their co-op grocery across the street from the chain grocery store. I think it was an AMP, the biggest chain grocery store branch. And so they literally were in the face of the grocery store that they were boycotting and managed to survive and do better than that grocery store. So they ended up hiring more people than the grocery store. Even though the grocery store finally capitulated and hired a Black person, it wasn't enough. Everyone was already going to the co-op. A co-op had higher sales, more employees, that kind of thing, and were able to give dividends within the first 3 years. Within the first 3 years, give dividends back to their members. So you get the idea. They also served more people than them. They had 400 members by 1940, but they served over 100,000 people every year. And then I think I'm out of time. So Black Panthers, also another group that's not known for their co-ops, but they actually had a whole co-op and community development strategy. It wasn't just a shoot 'em up and self-defense strategy, which most people know about. They used their purpose to defend Blacks against police brutality to actually create a whole system of community supports through co-ops and collective activity. And you'll see they had clothing factories, bakeries, plumbing repair, transportation, et cetera, in addition to the free breakfast programs and free health clinics. And their notion was we need to be building the society that we want while we're fighting against and fighting for liberation and fighting against oppression. We need to be building the kind of communities that we want to see, that we want for the future. So then I also brought a little bit more of a modern example, though they started in 1987. They're still in existence today. Our largest worker co-op, not just our largest Black and brown worker co-op, but the largest worker co-op in the United States is a worker co-op of Black and brown, mostly brown and Black, I guess I should say, home care workers. So they started in the South Bronx, 1987. Employing previously and low-skilled Latina and African-American women in home care. And this project was a project to raise both the quality of home care and the quality of home care work. And the way they understood they could raise both was by using a worker co-op model, right? So making sure that the unskilled women actually got skills, knew how to produce quality care. That also helped them to be competitive enough to get living wages in an industry that didn't give many living wages. And the worker co-op was also a way to give home care workers full-time work when often they were piecing together part-time contingent work. So they also gave them not just good salaries, but benefits, full-time work, career ladder opportunities because you could move up in your training. You could move up in positions in the organization. They actually created a nonprofit training arm so they could do their own training and make sure that the women who wanted additional training, so you could move from a home care provider to a nurse's assistant, to a nurse, an LPN, to an RN. You could also move up in the organization and become a trainer, or you could move into the organization up into the management of the organization. So you weren't stuck in any one position. Which is also rare in home care, right? Usually you just do home care for the rest of your life, pretty much. And then, as we said, giving you benefits, vacation time benefits, and also as an owner, right, they also got dividends. So every profitable year, which is most of the years they've been in existence, they've been able to give almost 25% back on their initial investment. So it's also a wealth building. They also have a retirement fund now. and do other wealth building projects. So really fascinating organization. They also have 2 other home care subdivisions. One is for disabilities. So they've got the nonprofit training, they've got the regular home care, they've got disabilities home care, and I'm sorry, I can't think of what the third one is. And then, as I said, and they do all this asset building as well. And managed to be our largest worker co-op in the United States. So again, you can see how co-ops, right, this is why I talk about being an anti-poverty program, right? They can take a job, work, that's the sort of the dregs, the lowest of the low, and build it into something that's meaningful, that workers can control for themselves, that provide all the things that we want a good job to provide, and include, right, democratic participation as well. So just to sum up, right, the important components that we learn from this, right, we need adequate resources, we need adequate management training, we need adequate financing, right? So we need to make sure to give co-op development, whether it's through programs or directly to people who are starting their own co-ops, right? We need to make sure they're provisioned properly and that we understand the kinds of resources that they need. Human energy and enthusiasm, right? I can't tell you how important, normally we talk about a charismatic leader, but that's not what I'm talking about here, because it's not that we want one leader, we want people who all see themselves as leaders. So we want everybody to see themselves as a member leader, right? As a member owner leader, right? And we want everyone to bring that enthusiasm and energy to the co-op. And we've seen, again, co-ops that are able to do that, to maintain, engender and maintain that level of energy and participation are the ones that do best and last longest. The solidarity and trust among members and community, again, building that sense of camaraderie, trust. A lot of that happens in those study circles and the study groups, right, where you're learning together, you learn to trust each other, to think together, to make decisions together. That, again, is important, and having that solid basis. Some of the co-ops actually start with groups who already know and trust themselves a little bit, but we often don't really know each other unless we're trying to decide about money together. So having that experience of deciding about the money things and the business together, even if we already knew each other or were friendly with each other, all that matters in this case. And then the solidarity and trust with community, as I said briefly, but I can't emphasize enough how important co-op longevity matters. Sorry, how important community solidarity is to co-op longevity. So making sure that co-ops connect with their communities, that the communities know about them, understand what they're doing, and feel connected really matters. And again, that the longevity of the co-op matters, is better. The internal education, we talked about study circles, and then public education, right? That communication, transparency is so important. Local control and intercooperation, so both the notion that the co-op allows self-determination for its members, right? But then also has intercooperation with other co-ops, with other community activities, with other movements is also equally important. So again, the internal solidarity and the external connections, ecosystem building also matters. Reaching and incorporating youth, I didn't really talk about that at all, but I also found that extremely fascinating. A lot of co-ops had like youth divisions to make sure that they incorporated and had something for the young people to do. And then also in the late 20th century, I found a lot of examples, sorry, not a lot. I found some fascinating examples about youth-owned co-ops, both in schools and in after school and summer programs, and how important that was for young people to be involved, partly because then they can feed into adult co-ops already knowing how to be a co-op and do a co-op, but also in their own right, the youth co-ops actually help the young people stay in school, be more connected, make some money, be productive in a collective solidarity way. And then leadership roles for women. I also didn't talk about that very much this time, but I have whole lectures where I talk about the role of Black women. It was another surprising thing when I did the research, how involved and how much leadership Black women had in the Black co-ops. Part of it, I think, is because they were already so involved in community development and mutual aid, right? A lot of the mutual aid systems are run and controlled by women, especially in the Black community. And I think for the co-op movement, it was kind of just natural for Black women to then move from those more informal kinds of collective solidarity things to the more formal co-op structures. And nobody seemed to think it was that weird because they'd already been doing it informally. But really, again, fascinating to see. And some of the co-ops, some of the men in some of the co-ops actually write about how important the women's leadership and the women's participation was to the sustainability of their co-op. So that's another reason why I put it in here, because some of the co-ops actually acknowledged that. It wasn't just what I was noticing. So I think I'm going to stop there. I would love it if we have questions. I'm happy to answer them and talk about some more stuff, or anything I either went over too fast or didn't cover. I'm happy to talk about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it and learned a lot. I'm thinking about how so many of our dominant narratives about civil rights and Black power in particular don't emphasize or don't really feature the cooperative elements that you've highlighted. And, honestly, your work just highlights that most Black movements throughout our existence in the United States had some sort of cooperative element to it. So can you speak a little bit about why you think that is, just in sort of movement narratives as it relates to the Black community?
That was one of the reasons I did the research and published the book, was because I couldn't understand that either. And then even as I started finding all this information, it kept coming up. So why is the information so hard to find? Why isn't it sort of in the movement histories, right? And so I've got a couple of speculations. I don't have a real answer. I have some speculations about why. So the first one is because of all the sabotage, right? I think we started hiding what we were doing probably from the 1880s. We didn't call them co-ops. We tried not to cause too much attention to them. And we had to go, in the 1880s, they actually literally had to go underground because things were so fierce. And so I think we got used to, like, I used to have people, I guess maybe I still do, but I used to have people come up to me afterwards and say, you know what, when you first started talking about it, I was like, oh no, we don't do that. But the more you talked about it, I realized my aunt and uncle must have been, that thing that they were doing must have been a co-op. I think my parents were in a land sharing thing. They suddenly, right? So once I gave them some words, and I didn't necessarily just say co-op, but that's why I also use economic cooperation. I try to use a lot of different terminology, because a lot of times they didn't call it the co-op, because if they called it the co-op, then someone would come and try to ruin it or smash it or whatever. So even when, like, you talked about it, what you were doing to your kids, you didn't call it the co-op. You just said, we were at the store or whatever. And so it wasn't until they started thinking about how they all went to a meeting to decide what the store should do, or how everybody paid some dues, and then they connected it to the stuff I was talking about. Then they were like, oh yeah, my family was involved in such. So I think that's one of the issues, right? The need for secrecy, and then the use of different terminology that doesn't automatically connect. So that's one. And the undergroundness, right, to protect ourselves. I think also just we live in a capitalist individualist world, and so the ideology of the society that we're in just doesn't allow us to really talk about or highlight. It makes us sometimes embarrassed, right? Because that's the other thing, sort of all this cooperation seems like, oh, we had to do that because we couldn't be capitalists, right? Instead of saying we had to do it because we were human beings and wanted a different way to relate to each other economically, right? But the narrative was, oh, we couldn't make capitalism work, and so we're kind of embarrassed about it, right? If you think about it, so many of us, we just want a piece of the pie, the real pie, right? So having a piece of the alternative pie, we're not going to be too excited about that. We're not going to kind of brag about it or anything. So I think that ideology part, and then by the 50s with the red baiting, right, it was actually really, really dangerous politically and economically for Black folks to be connected with anything that reeked of socialism, communism, whatever. And so again, I actually remember Andrew Young got an award from the Federation of Southern Cooperatives about, I don't know how long ago. And I remember he said in his talk that it's almost like they made a conscious decision in the 60s civil rights movements, like he was in the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Association, that if they wanted to get civil rights, political, legal rights, that they shouldn't talk about economics because it was so controversial, so whatever. And then he said, and also the Black community didn't agree, right? Even though I'm sitting here telling you that most of us participate in some kind of informal solidarity, economic cooperation, and a lot of us were in some kind of co-op. But when you talked about it politically, a lot of people didn't necessarily agree that that was the strategy. So he said everyone agreed we needed voting rights, everyone agreed we needed desegregation, or almost everyone agreed, right? And so they went with what everyone agreed to. And even though I found that almost all those civil rights organizations were quietly doing co-op stuff, it's not what they put in the national platform, it's not the stuff they did marches about, it's not, right? But they actually, a lot of them ended up having to do co-op stuff just because they couldn't get in the mainstream economics because of their political activity. And so they still needed to do the co-ops, but they didn't, it wasn't in the platform. So I don't know if that helps you, but that's kind of the stuff I found. And that's also partly why the book is called Collective Courage, because it really took courage to do these things in the face, the mainstream was saying either that co-ops don't work, that co-ops were bad, people were trying to stop you from doing it. And so, yeah.
So sort of building on that last idea, I was wondering in your research, can you speak to the role of government and how it has been disruptive in the formation or the encouragement of co-ops, and particularly as it relates to the infusion of dollars into the community through social services and benefits as an alternative? And then more on a positive side, have you found more recently any examples of governments supporting the creation of cooperatives?
That actually, I could probably do a whole hour lecture on that. So let me figure out what to say in a short period of time, but it's a great question. There's always been a complex relationship between local, state, federal governments and co-ops, especially Black co-ops. And so in some ways, there has been good government support, even though, as we said, we keep saying the ideology and stuff says that the US is against co-ops. But there's some really interesting things. The 1960s, the 1930s, there were actually government programs that gave money to co-ops. In the 60s, the money was to help keep young people in rural areas because there was this huge issue about losing rural populations and stuff. So it was actually money, and they understood that co-ops were a strategy. So like the Federation of Southern Cooperatives was started with first grant money for a meeting from Ford Foundation, but then a huge grant from Department of Economic Opportunity or something, to help keep young people in rural areas and recognizing that co-op ownership could help do that, right? So there's that kind of, and then again, there was the self-help co-op money from the FDR's administration. There was also a really interesting project for state money. So I'm actually doing the positive side first, but I'll go in and out of both. State money from North Carolina. There was a group of Black co-ops first in Eastern North Carolina that came together and created a coalition. Then they created a statewide Black co-op coalition. And one of the things they wanted to do was to create manuals in co-op education to start Black credit unions and co-ops, they actually were able to get a matching funds from the state, North Carolina State Agricultural Department, in order to do to create their manuals and then to distribute them throughout the state. And they have a fabulous track record. In 8 to 12 years. They went from like 1 Black credit union to 98 or something, and from 2 or 3 co-ops to 30 or something like that. So a really fascinating way that they were able, first with their own self-help and then to use that to leverage to get state money. So there are ways to do that kind of thing that have worked. I don't know other state histories because the only one I have is a dissertation about North Carolina, but I assume there might have been some other things happening in other states like that. So that's like a really fascinating part of how you can get government help. But then we also know, especially with the Pickford case against the U.S. Farm, what's it called? It's one of the farm grant associations, right? And we know that they actually denied Black loans for Blacks to help them own their own land or to start co-ops or be part of a co-op or to get a good loan for a co-op. Either they refused them loans or they gouged them with subprime loans that they couldn't pay and whatever. And actually just a few years ago in the Pickford 1 and 2 cases, they went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, yes, the federal government was guilty of gouging and failing Black farmers, and so they get a couple $1,000s back after all that. So there's definitely ways that the federal government interfered, right? Though a lot of the sabotage I found was really more private companies and private white activity, and not so much federal. But we know that there were federal and state things mostly because they were discriminating against Blacks in general. But also they weren't, they had this mixed relationship with whether they thought co-ops were good or not, and whether they thought co-ops were communist or not, and it depended on who was in power and that kind of thing. So there's that mixed relationship. The other interesting thing that's happening now that I think you were alluding to or hoping I would talk about is that we're actually getting some municipalities to put money into co-op development. My friend Stacy Sutton from University of Illinois at Chicago wrote a great article a couple of years ago on what she called co-op cities. She found about 10 to 12 municipalities that were seriously putting money, especially into worker co-op development. I think Richmond, California, maybe Richmond, Virginia, New York City, Madison, Wisconsin, Cleveland, Jackson, DC a little bit. I can't remember what the other cities are. But so there's some really interesting legislation and stuff to look at for other places that want to do that. And some great research that was done, especially again about worker co-ops and how they contribute to anti-poverty and our good employment strategies that were helped the city councils to then allocate money. New York City has been able to increase the amount every year. I think Madison put in a lot at the beginning. Cleveland, I think, mostly supported one program, but because that program went pretty well, they've been willing to put a little bit more money. I actually wrote an article in 2018, I guess it was, about the case for reparations. The sabotage against Black co-ops should be part of our case for reparations. And in there, I'm suggesting that we do more of what some of the cities are doing, that all cities, as part of their reparations payment, create these funds that would do co-op development and co-op education, because I think both we need education and we need non-extractive grants and non-extractive lending. And so I put sort of a whole, I thought that was something we could do with the reparations money that would go a long way to getting us out of the crossroads and into the co-op fork of the road. So I don't know, I hope that answered your question.
Hello, Carlos Coleman here. I actually wanted you to speak a little bit more about the transformative potential of cooperatives. You talk a little bit about the barriers and the like, and I myself have been reading a few ethnographies talking about some of the internal politics that might undermine some of their more transformative goals or aspirations. And so I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more to that part and maybe even build upon that relationship with community and ideology as influential factors within their, as I say, transformative potential, not just their growth as a business.
So yeah, I've been arguing. I actually have a lot of articles about the benefits of co-ops. And even though I'm an economist, I'm a political economist, so I understand the importance of political and social benefits, not just the economic and business benefits. And one of the things, not one, several of the things that I noticed when I started looking into this, and then some of the interviews I did with people involved with co-ops and co-op development, was how co-ops allow us to develop in an economic setting, to develop our, what I think I said in the presentation, our full potential as human beings. So what do I mean by that? Right? Because co-ops are not just a values-based, group-based enterprise, but because they also require democratic participation, that means that we have to learn by doing when we're in a co-op. And learning by doing really helps us to develop a variety of different kind of skills, right? So in order for co-ops to be run democratically, right, everybody has to have the same information. I don't know if any of you are economists, but one of the things in, one of the critiques we have of capitalism is there's what's called asymmetric information, right? The people with the capital, the people who are the managers know everything, and the people who are the workers know very little, right? But in a co-op, you have to have symmetric information, right? Everybody has to have the same information because everybody's part of the decision making about things, right? So you have to have what's called open books. You have to be able to help develop the budget. You have to see where the money's being spent. You have to know so that you can help make decisions about what to do next, what to do under these circumstances, that kind of thing. So that level of transparency, especially economic transparency, and then the financial literacy that you have to develop as a co-op member, right? Those things, it's not like you leave them at the door of work like we do so much of the other stuff we learn at work. But in a co-op, once you learn financial transparency, once you learn financial literacy and you have transparency in your job, right, you're going to, you know, that's going to spill over into other things, other activities that you're involved in. If you're on the PTA, if you're in other organizations, you're going to start to expect that in those organizations, in your own home, and other things that you do. Even if your partner still works in a capitalist firm, you're going to start asking them, well, didn't they know what's spent here or how this is spent, right? So that transparency really, I think, is and that literacy is transformative. The fact that you get to speak up and get to have a say and learn how to make decisions with other people, right? That means a good co-op also teaches conflict resolution and conflict transformation and collective decision making. Even if your co-op still has like a majority vote, there's still some level of this trying to bring everyone to consensus, talking through an idea, how do you address the conflict, right? And the better co-ops actually really do trainings on that. So again, you get to be a better person in terms of how do you even handle conflict, right? How you handle differences in ideas. Again, you're doing it in your work, right? Which we do for more hours of the day than anything else. And so then when you get home and when you're in other places, you're going to start practicing that too. So I've often argued that our participation in cooperative economics also makes us better human beings, better civic participants. So it changes our own lives, it changes the people around us, and it changes how we deal with the world. And so technically, right, theoretically, ideally, the more of us who are engaged that way, the more we could change the rest of the world around us, right? The more we can expect transparency in the politics, right? The more we can start asking our elected officials about the budgeting stuff, because now we understand budgeting, right? We know how to read those books. We can ask them to see them and we can talk to them about it, right? So there's all kinds of ways that we can transform ourselves and our societies because of the new capabilities, the new ways of working together, the new ideas we have about how we should work together. Also, being in a co-op, we now know what kinds of policies and programs would help develop more co-ops or would help support our co-op. So we also can get more involved in general in policy advocacy and that kind of thing, because we have a better sense of what we need to create more of the kinds of co-ops and the kind of work situations we want, and we have better capacity to how to articulate it and talk about it, that kind of thing. One of my best examples of transformation is I interviewed a guy who had been in a co-op while he was in prison in Puerto Rico. And so that's one of my new passions, is trying to learn as much as I can about the existing incarcerated worker co-ops around the world. Outside of Puerto Rico, the US doesn't have them yet. But I'm learning about fascinating programs. And one of the things he said was that he was pretty lost. He went to prison when he was about 19. He was pretty lost. But when he joined the co-op, and he eventually became the secretary, because he's actually a poet. The co-op is actually an artist co-op, but he became the secretary because he's a writer and was good with language and that kind of thing. But he talks about how the co-op just changed his whole life. It gave him a mission and a purpose. It gave him a new group of people to work with. It gave him confidence. And it actually changed his behavior so much that his sentence got commuted. I think it was a 30 or 40-year sentence, and I think he only served like 11 years of it or something. So he's another one who talks about just how important it was to have a different way of dealing with people, a different way of making money, a different way of dealing with other people, creating a whole new sense of family, allowing him and others in the co-op to actually give back to their families and to show their families that they were worth something, and to show themselves that they were worth something. So that's, in some ways, that's like the most extreme kind of transformation. Somebody who's in a totally even worse dehumanizing situation than just being a regular worker, right? But being encaged and obviously having all kinds of challenges for why you end up in the cage and all that kind of thing. But then the co-op really helping to rebuild both their economic, their social, their educational side. So I guess I should end there. I was trying to end on some high note, and then I kind of went, so for me, transformation is also one of the important parts of our need and reckoning for why we should be taking that co-op solidarity economics route, because it's so important for us as human beings. As I said, I feel like we've been so alienated from ourselves as human beings. This is a way to regain our humanity in a way that really has proven to be a viable strategy for economic development in addition to human development.
Great, some space there. Wow, that was a powerful story to end with, and powerful research and knowledge that you're bringing to all of us, and really exciting to hear about the research that you have that's ongoing. And so really, thanks again so much for joining us today. And I'm looking forward, just based on the questions that were asked, to the discussions that will follow. I want to let you know what's coming next. We will take a very short break in a minute, just so that people can get up and stretch, and restrooms are over there and so on. But then we're going to come back to hear about what we found so far. What is the state of democratization initiatives here in Northern Virginia in particular? So we'll be hearing from interns at DNOVA. We'll be hearing from Kelly Wilkerson. We'll be hearing from all of you with a roll call. We'll have a lunch period in which we'll eat. We'll get to mingle and talk with each other. Not all of you can see it, but I can see that many of the ingredients are in the room. And when we have a question about the role of government, you bet that means that local government is in the room. And when we have questions about research, well, we have academics in the room, and we have coders and others in the room. So really looking forward to that. and then we'll come together for our major panel and workshops in the afternoon. Again, I really want to thank you. I really appreciated your lecture, and we'll make it available to many more people thanks to the work of Community Access and GMU TV. Thank you.
The Democratizing NOVA Summit came out of our initial desire when we're building the Democratizing NOVA project to really enhance community engagement and opportunities for collaboration. So a major component of this community engaged research project is continuing the conversations with community members, and we wanted to have a space where everyone could come and gather and talk about the work they're doing, what's going on in the region, to learn about Democratizing NOVA and what we're trying to achieve here.
It's my pleasure to introduce Kelly Wilkerson, who is a doctoral student in sociology in our public sociology program here at George Mason University. Kelly is also the project manager for Democratizing NOVA and has been doing just an incredible job in not only designing the research program, but also taking on all the administrative parts of this project. So please welcome Kelly Wilkerson up here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Ben, so much for that introduction. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what the Democratizing NOVA project is, what it looks like, what it's designed to be, where it's currently standing, and where it's going in the future with the help of a lot of our team members who have put in an incredible amount of work over the semester to kind of show you what our database is looking like and what we're finding in the region. So just a brief introduction again, I'm Kelly Wilkerson. I'm the project manager for Democratizing NOVA. It's crazy to say that we launched like a year ago yesterday because it's already grown exponentially in that time. So I can't wait to see as it continues to grow and continues to shape and continues to get involved. We also have James, Lupe, and Gabe who are interning on the project. They're next system fellows, but I will let them introduce themselves when they come up to give a little bit of a presentation on what they've been working on so hard this semester. So Democratizing NOVA is a community engaged research project at the Center for Social Science Research, and it's designed to engage with efforts to build community, economic, and political democracy in Northern Virginia. So currently, we're looking at current, active, and past initiatives that increase participation and ownership of everyday individuals in the institutions and communities that impact their daily lives. So we're looking for any initiative really that promotes democracy, and we have 16 different categories that we're tracking. James, Lupe, and Gabe will go into a little bit more detail about all of those categories. Overall, I would say there's three main components of the Democratizing NOVA project. There's the database, which currently has around 200 initiatives that we've found in the Northern Virginia region. There's the assessment, which is upcoming, and moments for collaboration, which exists at every part of this project, right? Relationship building between community members, between the organizations that we're tracking, and finding ways to build ties between the university and the community. So before I go into a little bit about the database and the assessment, it's important to describe what we're considering as Northern Virginia. When we first started, we had a team of graduate students and Dr. Benmansky, none of which were local to the region. So we spent quite a lot of time talking about what does it mean to consider yourself in Northern Virginia. And we found a lot of just varying different capacities. So for the purposes of Democratizing NOVA, we think of Northern Virginia as anything from the DC border to the West Virginia border and down south to about Richmond. So it is quite a large area, but it helps us really track what's going on in this region as we've defined it. So the first component is the database, which we're wrapping up this semester. We spent a year with a lot of team members really searching the internet at this point, right? What initiatives are in the area? What organizations are out there using a bunch of different search engines, trying to see what's advertised, and even social media, right? What initiatives have Facebook pages? What initiatives are using social media to organize in the region? And from there, right, starting to do phone calls, seeing, hey, here's what we're doing at Democratizing NOVA. Here's what Democratizing NOVA is. And we found you. Do you have any other initiatives that you work with? Do you have any other organizations that you partner with that we should be aware of? And just making sure that we've done a thorough understanding of what's here, right? So the database is intended to be a living document. As we're wrapping it up this semester, our plan is over the summer and the fall semester is to turn it into an open access resource for community organizers, university researchers, and students who are interested in promoting democratization and social change through various projects. And again, coming back to the opportunities for collaboration. So like I said, there are 16 different categories that we've identified as how to define a democratization initiative. And they're really interesting, and I can't wait for them to walk you through all of them. Again, right now we've identified a little over 200 initiatives in the area, so they'll walk you to a few more of them. And hopefully at the end, when we do our roll call, we can hear more from all of you in the room. So that's where we're at with the database, right? It's intended, again, to be a living document, an open access living document that is never really going to be complete. As initiatives keep coming up in the region and as new things emerge, right, they can continue to be added, and it can be used as a resource amongst the entire Northern Virginia region, and potentially replicated in other regions across the US or even the globe. So our next step and our main focus this summer is this assessment. So there's 3 parts of this, right? What's there? So identification and assessment of existing organizations, community action, and institutional building in the region. So identifying what sort of initiatives have we found? What categories are those initiatives in? What is the work that's going on currently in the Northern Virginia region? The next component is how are they connected? So doing a little bit of network mapping of institutional, organization, and individual association ties to see where there is existing ties, where there is existing collaboration, and going into the third component, like where are there gaps? Where is there opportunities for more collaboration? What's missing in the region? So identifying areas for greater interaction and growth, identifying areas that we're not noticeably finding a lot of initiatives. And what does that mean? And it doesn't mean that they're not there. Does that mean that we're not finding any? And how is there room to grow and further democratization in that area? So I will transition to James. If you want to come up and introduce yourself and walk you through his portfolio that he's been working on all semester. So they've all been working on really searching through 4 of our 16 initiatives to kind of see what's going on in Northern Virginia. So James, come on up.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me? Just making sure. Okay. My name is James Kondo. I am one of the interns at Democratizing NOVA. And then the first category that I was looking at was called community money. The purpose of this category was to document initiatives that were dedicated to democratizing money and developing alternative local economies. Examples of this would include local currencies and non-traditional forms of exchange. The democratization of money denaturalizes capitalist exchange and develops exchange outside of the capitalist market. While there is a deficit of community money initiatives in Northern Virginia, there is still a growing sector of these initiatives in the DC metro area. Time banks are the most relevant example of this. In this banking structure, 1 hour of work is equal to 1 credit, and you can redeem this for an hour of another person's work to help you with whatever miscellaneous task you want. And then the examples that I found were DC Time Bank in Washington, DC, and then Greenbelt Time Bank in Greenbelt, Maryland. All right, and then my second category was mutual aid. So to me, I think the best slogan for mutual aid is solidarity and not charity, because I think that it offers, a third way between nonprofit charities and public social welfare programs, and avoids a lot of the bureaucracy that comes from either of those. And it provides direct relief. Examples of this include Food Not Bombs Friedrichsburg, which is an anti-war and mutual aid organization, and then Food Justice DMV, which distributes food to the local community on Tuesdays in Virginia, Thursdays in Maryland, and Saturdays in DC. They also provide essential services to the migrant community, including legal services and the distribution of other essentials like clothing or furniture. All right, and then community rights was my third category. So community rights is essentially legal advocacy organizations for things like home rule or for protecting particular identity groups. So Sanctuary DMV provides pro bono legal services for migrants in the DC metro area. Solar United Neighbors advocates for neighborhoods to have the right to energy independence and facilitates the formation of solar cooperatives in neighborhoods in Northern Virginia. Justice for Muslims Collective seeks legal protection for Muslims and an end to cultural and systemic Islamophobia. And Hogar Immigrant Services also provides pro bono legal services for migrants in the DC metro area. All right, and then the last category that I have definitely has, the most vibrant and rich history in Virginia, and also, is still successful today. Cooperatives are defined as any enterprise that's, democratically owned or controlled. The most well-known of these is a consumer cooperative, where consumers pay either a yearly or lifetime membership fee and are able to participate in company decision-making. And then another common form of cooperatives is the credit union. And Northern Virginia has a lot of these. They're nonprofit, and what would be profit ends up becoming dividends, low interest rates, no annual fees, stuff like that. So for example, in Virginia, we have Apple Federal Credit Union, Loudoun Credit Union, Nextmark, Arlington Community Federal Credit Union, Front Royal Federal Credit Union, Commonwealth One Federal Credit Union, Midway Federal Credit Union, and then various federal employee federal credit unions. But then Northern Virginia also has a very thriving worker cooperative sector. So for example, we have Velocity Bicycle Cooperative, which is a worker-owned bicycle shop. We have Dulce Hogar, which is a cooperative specializing in home cleaning. We have Nova Web Development, which is a cooperatively owned developing company that provides website services to progressive initiatives. We have Tight Shift Laboring Cooperative, which provides cleaning services and yard work around the DMV. And then we have Potomac Fiber Arts Gallery and Multiple Exposures Gallery, which are both, art galleries that are cooperatively owned by the artists. And then there's also, a sector of cooperative education. So for example, we have Annandale Cooperative Preschool and Sleepy Hollow Cooperative Preschool. And then these preschools are cooperatively run by parents, and they also function as employees or as people who are distributing food or as teachers. So this is, the state of the cooperative sector. And then I am going to pass this on to Lupe.
Hi, everyone. I'm recovering from a sinus infection, so bear with me. I'm going to talk slowly because I'm trying to keep my breath. But my name is Lupe. I am an intern here at Democratizing NOVA, and I am a Next Systems Fellow. I'm also a senior here at GMU. I'll be talking about the categories that I have been exploring and looking into and researching this past semester. The first one is advocacy organizations. And this category is made up of pro-democracy groups, as well as groups that promote community wealth building, which is actively modeled by groups like the Democracy Collaborative. We also have groups like the AFL-CIO. These groups actively work to organize and provide the tools for individuals to take on a more active role in participating in their community. There's also a good example is Virginia Organizing. This is a group that empowers regular people to take on the issues that they care about and directly affect them in their community. So they're very into organizing people and giving them a voice and helping them stand up for whatever is happening in their community. My next category is campus communities. And this category is made up of groups that are dedicated to building democratic communities within and around the college and university campuses. One example is SAIL, which is here on our campus, and it's based out of the School of Integrative Studies. Other groups listed here are on our campus as well, and this category, despite extensive searching, it was quite difficult category to find initiatives in. one of the things that like we hope comes out of the summit today, you know, is that networking and contacting. So maybe you folks have, you know, a group that you're like, hey, that fits perfectly, you know. So that's one of the things that we hope comes out of this. My next category is community-owned media, and those are folks like the Fairfax Public Access, which is here with us. We have Loudoun Now, Culpeper Media Network, and the Herndon Community Television. This category is made up of community-ran and owned media. These outlets cover local community and interests of the public within that community. These outlets encourage participation and involvement of its community members within the network. This was another category where media is really difficult to find, media that is privately, or not privately owned, but cooperatively owned. It's really difficult to find. And my last category is the Indigenous category. And in the Indigenous category, I think it's really important to recognize the fact that organizations that, you know, lack attention from people, lack funding, don't have as developed websites, and they're not as likely to come up in the algorithms when we do searches. So Indigenous categories were definitely something that were difficult to find in this area. But hopefully with talking and getting to know and calling people, we can find more initiatives that fit in this. But I do have an example of an initiative that is doing, you know, the kind of work that we're looking for to fit our criteria. They are the CNAY, the Center for Native American Youth, and it is an example of something that would fit into this criteria. They partner with other Indigenous groups and have created the Democracy is Indigenous campaign, which encourages Native youth leaders to work in community to uplift the importance of participation in non-tribal democracies. And those are my categories. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I am Gabe. I am an intern at Democratizing NOVA, and I'm a sophomore here at GMU. So my first category is expand. We defined it here at DNOVA as expansion of the franchise, personhood, citizenship, or residency. As a Latine themselves, I expected a lot of these sort of initiatives around here, and I did find a few that I want to share with you guys. So the first one, La Colectiva, which is a collective of advocates who organize for the liberation of undocumented folks in the DMV. They do this through direct action, and one example of this is hashtag ICE out of Arlington. Some of you may know that ICE has an increased presence in Arlington. The next initiative that I wanted to highlight is the Congregation Action Network. So that is a network of different religious congregations. So they do a lot of work in the DMV advocating for the ending of deportations, detentions, and more. One more that's not listed on here is CASA. This is an initiative dedicated to supporting immigrants and their families through numerous programs, including ESOL classes, tax and financial education, and community organizing. My next category was property. So this is community-owned property, land trusts, and commons. I highlighted two really significant ones that stood out to me. So the first one is the Virginia Statewide Community Land Trust. They work by buying up land and then building homes on top of that land and then renting the home to low-income buyers. So taking the land out of the equation. So that makes housing much more affordable. And as you can see in that chart, the blue line is the affordability benefit. So it is lower than a traditional housing price. My next category is anchor institutions. So we defined anchor institutions as universities. Actually, I got this definition and the University of California, which is doing similar work, University of California, San Francisco, universities, hospitals, and other enduring organizations that play a vital role in their communities and economies. And two that I wanted to highlight in Virginia was DNOVA, which is a nonprofit healthcare provider. They've been a mainstay in the DMV since 1956. They have numerous clinics specifically created to help those of us who are underinsured or uninsured in the DMV. Another institution that I wanted to highlight was the National Cooperative Bank. They provide banking services to co-ops and other small independent businesses all across the country. And my last category is services. So services is anything that's publicly or community owned or that provides utilities, banking, or other services. So one example that's interesting, we had a dialogue about this at DNOVA, was free Wi-Fi around the DMV. So we considered that a public service because it's free and it's publicly available and it's at the discretion of us, the people. And another service that I wanted to highlight was the Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing. So they differ. We didn't consider them property in the property category because they don't specifically own any property. They connect buyers with land, with affordable housing. And another initiative that I wanted to highlight that's not listed is the Muslim Association of Virginia. So they provide a lot of services to anyone in 7 corners, so if you're ever there. Thank you.
Good morning, you all. So I want to begin by saying, my name is Nathaniel Smith. I want to start by saying I'm not a Next System Fellow, nor have I conducted the impressive research that I'll be presenting on today. Instead, I'm stepping in for Camilo, who's unable to join us today. Because of my lack of knowledge, I'll simply be spotlighting some of the initiatives that Camilo has researched this semester and encouraging you all to reach out to them. If you represent an initiative I'll mention today, I strongly encourage you to come forward during our roll call. Finally, I want to re-emphasize that the material I'm presenting today is not my own, but Camilo's, whose hard work over the semester I simply will not do justice. Thank you. In this presentation, I'll be reviewing 3 initiative types. Participatory alternatives to policing and war, direct democracy in elections, and open government policies and transparency reforms. Let's begin. Initiatives categorized as alt-police, so right down there, perform one of 2 activities: growing people's say about policing and war making, or offering them alternatives to it. The first is about empowerment, amplifying actors' voices or providing them a channel to weigh in on matters of policing or war making. The second is about posing and advancing alternatives to them. The 2 initiatives I'll be spotlighting today predominantly perform the second activity. Arlington for Justice is refocusing police efforts around solving problems such as addiction treatment and mental health crises, decriminalizing children, and curbing the over-policing of Black communities and communities of color. In addition to offering a regular newsletter, Arlington for Justice is advancing its goals through petitioning, providing free educational resources, and hosting the October 2nd, 2021 Ride for Black Lives bicycle tour. Please excuse me. Don't Call the Police is an online directory. This is another initiative under that alt-police category. It is an online directory that provides users access to alternatives to calling the police when facing a situation that requires de-escalation and/or intervention, not violence. The initiative is actually based outside of NOVA, but details a number of organizations within the region that provide housing, mental health, domestic violence, and sexual assault, youth, and criminal resources, with plans to detail resources for the LGBTQ+, the elderly, and elderly communities, as well as for those struggling with substance abuse. The resources listed on Don't Call the Police's database were put together by Prince William County Mutual Aid and Standing Up for Racial Justice, Northern Virginia, 2 initiatives also included in our database. One last point about the alt police category. The initiatives categorized as alt police were too many for me to cover in just one session. So I reviewed their websites and took a look at their mission statements. And I thought by pulling out their objectives, we could paint a better portrait of what is going on in the area and what their goals are. So a couple of the phrases I found include abolition of the penitentiary industrial complex and ICE, curbing police surveillance, mental health, promoting non-discriminatory policing, re-envisioning community safety, sharing food to protest war, and substance abuse. The next initiative type is direct democracy in elections. Organizations categorized as direct dem, so that's our abbreviation there, advance democratic practices whereby an electorate, not a representative of the electorate, makes decisions. Practices such as ballot initiatives and referendum are 2 familiar examples of direct democratic practices. Mandate Democracy, the organization I'll be speaking about today, is using information technologies to empower an informed electorate and enhance citizenship, participation, and confidence in government. They're doing this through online voting referenda on policies related to government integrity, equal justice under the law, allocating natural resources, and in-office conduct. And they're holding officials accountable to the referenda by disseminating their results, monitoring and reporting officials' compliance, and enacting motions of no confidence. My final initiative type is open government policies and transparency reforms. Initiatives characterized as Open Gov maintain or improve people's rights to access government documents and proceedings, allowing for effective public oversight of our elected officials. The initiative I'll be spotlighting is the Virginia Coalition for Open Government, who since 1996 has been expanding access to government records, meetings, and other proceedings at the state and local level. This concludes my portion of the presentation. I hope it was both effective and informative. Thank you all.
And before I close out with the last of the 16 categories, can we get another round of applause for all of these people who have worked so hard building this database? I will say Nathaniel was a pre-Next System Fellow. He was part of the first course ever at the university taught by Dr. Ben Mansky last summer and one of the first interns with Democratizing NOVA. So he is well informed and in good company with all of the Next System Fellows. So thank you all so much. The last category that we'll talk about is public administration. So participatory forms of public administration and governance. And I did want to spend a few minutes just talking about this because this has been consistently in the past year one of the initiatives that of all of the people who've worked on this project have kind of struggled with finding. And we know there's legacies right from the 1970s of this, and through like current conversations we've had with Fairfax County, we're learning that they're trying to like refocus and repurpose and rejuvenate participatory democracy in neighborhood and community services and community centers and neighborhood buildings. So I did want to acknowledge that while we didn't find an explicit title or explicit organization to put on here, we are seeing current iterations through conversation and collaboration already through the DNOVA project of how this is coming back and what it looks like in the Northern Virginia region. So to wrap up before lunch, we just wanted to do a quick roll call, and we were going to invite you all up to come say your name, what organization you're from, and what sort of work you're doing, and maybe where do you think you fit in the database, or so on. So just a quick hello, here's where I'm from, and what's going on, so we can see who all is in the room. So if you want to come up to the Q&A stand, can we turn the Q&A mic on? Cool. Anybody? Any takers to go first? Awesome, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this event today. It's been wonderful so far. So I'm Catherine Oline. I'm with Mason Center for Humanities Research, and we have a new public humanities initiative, and it's called Alienation and Belonging: Shifting Cultural Landscapes in Northern Virginia. We're working with a number of local partners. I imagine some of them might be on your database, so I'm very interested to take a look. Two of those are Tenants and Workers United in Alexandria, and another one is an indigenous community, Barrios Unidos activist group. And so this was more active sort of in the 60s and 70s, but we're going to go there and collect some oral histories about the early days of their activism. The project is mainly focused on immigration, of course, but also on kind of this very complex and troubled history of Northern Virginia that we'd like to really continue to highlight, because I think in some of the kind of, public image of Northern Virginia has been really positive, that it's a tech corridor and there's been a lot of infrastructure development, and of course that is wonderful, but we also want to make sure that these other stories are highlighted. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Sarah Mansky. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Global Affairs and the Foundation section of the business school. And I'm the co-founder of a project called Bread and Roses, which uses the power of token economics and distributed ledger technology to convert private-owned businesses to worker-owned cooperatives. And I'm also working with Holochain, which is a more environmentally friendly distributed ledger technology.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Palace Washington. I am with Fairfax County Department of Neighborhood and Community Services, and I am a division director with that organization. And we're doing a lot of fun stuff. The county has embarked in ensuring that inclusive engagement is a core pillar and priority of how we do work through our strategic plan. So we are creating an inclusive engagement practice policy guidelines that all of our county agencies must be a part of and abide by. So we're looking forward to that being rolled out and really being a core principle of how we do work, recognizing that it's not only about access, but it's reducing the barriers and engaging folks in meaningful and transformative ways. So as you interact with government in Fairfax County, you should be seeing us do things differently where inclusive engagement is at the core. As an organization, Neighborhood and Community Services also partners with many nonprofits throughout Fairfax County to really think about neighborhood, place-based, collective impact approaches to doing the work, ensuring that community voice is at the core, and any other programs or activities that we do sponsor and provide to residents are really guided by how lived experience and how the community interacts with those services. So those are a couple of the things that we're doing. Just wanted to be able to share and have a little shout out for Neighborhood and Community Services.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Aaron Rayback. I'm a junior at Arlington Tech at the Career Center, and I'm here from Code for NOVA. I'm the student coordinator, and what we're trying to do right now and what I'm helping with is getting students involved in this cooperative environment and trying to get students more engaged with this sort of activity and try and allow for more exciting stuff to happen in the future.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lily Deveneaux. I am a current student here at Mason. I'm getting my master's this semester, and I'll be here in the fall as a public sociology PhD student. And I also work at the MITRE Corporation. I started off in the social justice platform, which is brand new to MITRE as of last year. So helping them to really stand up social justice, looking at these community-based things. And now I am helping MITRE to create a corporate social innovation initiative and arm. So community-based participatory research is really going to be a big part of how we are trying to move forward with whole of government as well. So as you're talking about in this room, there are a lot of different moving pieces, and I think that the people on the top are actually hearing these things as well, and I think that there's a big appetite to move toward more participatory types of research and engagement and collective building. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Joanna Garay, and I am the organizer for Nova Lucero. We right now are focusing on work development in Arlington through worker cooperatives. Our organization has helped launched, with help from another organization from DC called Beloved Community Incubator, a cleaning co-op named Mujeres Manos a la Obra. And they launched in October. So right now, we're still helping them to gain more marketing and just become more, just get more business. And so right now, that's primarily what we're focused on. But I think we think that, like everyone in this room here, that worker cooperatives is a great business model.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Emma Carnes, and I'm a Master's of Public Policy student down at the University of Virginia, and I am here with the Virginia Solidarity Economy Network.
Hi, everybody. Matthew Slats, UVA PhD student, also working at VCU, and also a part of the Virginia Solidarity Economy Network. So we'll invite you to come to our session later on today to learn more about what we're up to. But excited to be here and paralleling a lot of the work that's going on here at Mason, which is really exciting to see.
Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Elkner. I'm a web development and computer science teacher at the Arlington Career Center, but my raison d'etre is actually to help plant the seeds for the solidarity economy in my South Arlington community, and I'm involved in a number of projects around cooperatives and democratizing tech, so I'm excited to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Ivana Escobar and I am the Director of Collective Impact for United Community. I oversee Community Plus, which is a collective impact initiative. We currently have 5 working groups: safety, neighborhood livability, children and youth well-being, economic opportunity, and health. And within these working groups, what we do is we bring county officials, community voice, as well as other NGOs and other actors that all come to the table and work together to create a plan. We are seeing great impact in that, where we have, I'll give an example, the Economic Opportunity Group. They're focusing specifically on bringing community wealth within the Route 1 corridor. So right now they're just trying to work together to see what does that mean, as well as within the Health Working Group, we're seeing people focus on potentially bringing medical homes to the areas where we see that there isn't any doctors around and the only place that they go to is urgent care. So we're trying to change that mindset, but I look forward to hearing from you guys, and I will, try to nod you guys to get more information. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's so exciting seeing all of these points for collaboration and opportunities and all of these passionate initiatives and organizations that are in the region and in the room today. If you do have questions for us at the DNOVA team, feel free to email us anytime. Our email is dnova@gmu.edu, and we're always happy to talk more. So thank you so much.
Wow, that was truly impressive, I have to say. It's really impressive to see the energy that's in the room, the experience, the initiatives that people are taking, the risks that people are taking right now. Congratulations on the work of just a few short months in terms of really ramping up. And also, there are a number of people, in addition to Nathaniel, who are in the room who are part of starting this up. I see Josh here, and Gergana, and Katiana, and others who are students in our first course who helped us to really refine these categories and get the project going. So I can see where we've come from, and I can see where we're going, and where we're going seems very positive. Speaking of positivity, I also just want to acknowledge some of the Next System Fellows who are in the room who are not interning with Democratizing NOVA, but are doing other important work. And And let's see, I'm going to go through the list. I don't miss. Okay, there's Jimena Espinoza, who's with U.S. Solidarity Economy Network and Virginia Solidarity Economy Network, and has been interning with both of them. To the right there, we have Clay Foley, who is interning with Women for Peace Code Pink. It's been a very important time for that work. And Kristen Tallman, who is interning with our own project, Next System Media Project, writing an article about all these initiatives for the Nonprofit Quarterly, and is also a reporter for the Financial Times and her part-time, so look for her climate reporting. Sitting at the table there. Really an impressive group of people.
A strong hope for us is to really strengthen our community ties and opportunities for collaboration. This is the first year of the project. We launched on Earth Day in 2021, so we're really celebrating our first year of all the work we've been doing, and now we're presenting to the community members and trying to hope it opens doors for collaboration in the future.
I am only up here so that my colleague, Dr. Amy Best, who is the outgoing chair of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology and the interim director of the Center for Social Science Research, is not in a position to introduce herself. So let me introduce Dr. Best, who is chairing this major panel. Put your hands together for her and for the panelists.
Welcome. I've been so inspired by the presentations today thus far and the folks in the room. So this is a really exciting moment for the Center for Social Science Research and our commitment to using social science research to advance community capacity building and economic capacity building. It's for social impact, and to do it through a lens of equitable partnering with community organizations and municipal government. So this is a very exciting moment for us too. But I don't want to delay. I'm so honored to be on this panel with this wonderful group of folks. The panel is focused on community wealth building and the university. And I am joined by Joe Gainan at the end, who is Vice President of Strategy and Programs at the Democracy Collaborative. Guillermo Zamora from the SEIU, who serves the International Local 32BJ, but also serves as an external organizer, as well as Carla Bruce, who is the Chief Equity Officer at Fairfax County, as well as Mylon Tran, who's the Executive Director of the Virginia Asian Chamber of Commerce. So welcome all. So this is a panel that we're hoping will facilitate conversation. So I have some questions for our panelists today, and we've asked them to speak for about 10 minutes. And I have another question that will follow that. And then as time allows, we'll have questions from all of you. So let's get started. So given the major challenges facing both our regional and global communities, what can and should be done here in Northern Virginia to build community wealth and a more democratic economy? And what are the responsibilities of the university in this work? So how can public universities like George Mason play a positive role in the process? So that's a two-part question. And we're going to start with Joe and then go to Carla, and then Mylon, and then Guillermo.
Thank you, Amy. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the conveners for bringing together this important conversation, especially my colleague and friend, Ben Mansky. It's a real privilege to be with you all here in Fairfax County. So Amy referenced challenges, local and global, that we're facing in our communities and asked what we need to do in response. And I'm going to take advantage of going first to quickly frame up those challenges and speak to how and why major initiative on community wealth building here in Northern Virginia is warranted. So first up, we're in a period of deep, ongoing, multi-dimensional crisis. I don't actually think we need to spend a lot of time belaboring that. I think it's actually increasingly uncontroversial. There's growing awareness, even at the highest levels, about the systemic nature of the crisis that we're facing. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's Janet Yellen, Secretary of the Treasury, in her first day message to her departmental staff, where she talked about the 4 historic crises facing the United States. So here's Yellen. COVID-19 is one. But in addition to the pandemic, the country is also facing a climate crisis, a crisis of systemic racism, and an economic crisis that has been building 50 years. The nature of this crisis is increasingly understood. It's a crisis of our current economic model. Awareness is more and more widespread. So now we need to move, and move quickly, to solutions. Because, in my view, a dangerous gulf still remains between the magnitude of the systemic challenges that we face and the scope and scale of the responses that are being conceived and proposed. And from this gulf, if we're not careful, new dangers may soon begin to appear here in America. So the conversation we're having here today at George Mason is an increasingly urgent and necessary one. What would an adequate response to Janet Yellen's 4 crises even look like? And what would that look like on the ground here in Northern Virginia? In analytical terms, we might look to identify the hard constraints of these overlapping crises such that we can see a landing zone for effective remedial and transformative action, and then see the very severe challenge that if we are to strike simultaneously at all aspects of this crisis together. First, the racial wealth gap in the United States is estimated at around $10 trillion, wealth that has been extracted and stolen from and denied to communities of color. And that's equivalent to around half of annual US gross domestic product. At the same time, we're currently consuming at a rate of throughput that is beyond regeneration, equivalent to 1.5 planet Earths. So to get us back within planetary boundaries and avert climate collapse, even with technology and green growth in some sectors, that inevitably means cutbacks in consumption for some, and degrowth of some kind, however unpalatable that may be. Meanwhile, economic inequality and stagnant median wages and living standards for so many pose a real challenge of building a majoritarian political coalition that's capable of both predistributive and redistributive action without relying on growth, and at the same time delivering reparative justice, all the while avoiding the pitfalls of a reactionary politics, racialized division, and instincts to pull up the ladder by semi-privileged groups. So if you take the intersection of those challenges, we've got a really wicked problem in political economy terms. The landing zone for accomplishing all of this at the same time is by definition pretty narrow. It's going to require a shift in the ownership and control and functioning of the economy that dwarfs even the Industrial Revolution or the upheavals of the 20th century. And of course, we need to seek to do so peaceably and on the basis of rebuilding community and democratic public life. That's the challenge. Only certain pathways forward will deliver the fundamental changes in outcomes that are necessary. To put this in a nutshell, and speaking to the overarching theme of this summit here today, we need a democratic economy in support of a democratic politics. So, at the Democracy Collaborative, we and our allies have an approach to building this democratic economy that we call community wealth building. Community wealth building is a system-changing approach to community economic development that works to produce broadly shared economic prosperity, racial equity, and ecological sustainability through reconfiguring the economic institutions and local economies on the basis of greater democratic ownership, participation, and control. It's about establishing direct community ownership and control of the local economy. Already emerging in many cities and communities in response to the crises and the needs on the ground, community wealth building offers real practical solutions to localities and regions that are struggling with the legacy of decades of extraction, disinvestment, displacement, and disempowerment. Instead of trying to clean up around the edges of a failing economic model, what we're trying to do with community wealth building is change the model itself, and do that through mobilizing the largely untapped power of the local public, quasi-public, and nonprofit sector, and other rooted anchor institutions as the basis for a new local economy. Community wealth building involves joined-up action across 5 pillars of direct intervention in local economies. The first is inclusive and democratic enterprise. Cities, regions should have multiple enterprise forms, including worker and consumer cooperatives, social enterprises, municipal enterprise, and more, based on the recognition that the ownership of productive capital is the heart of where power lies in any political economic system. Second, locally rooted finance. Cities and local institutions should redirect money in service of the real economy through public and community banks, credit unions, targeted investments, impact investing, and more. Third, fair work. Every worker must receive a living wage and have real power in and control over their workplace to ensure decent working conditions and the advancement of trade union rights. 4, just use of land and property. Cities and other jurisdictions should mobilize land and property assets to build real wealth in their communities, bring local land and real estate development back under community control, and combat speculation and displacement. And 5, progressive procurement. Local governments and place-based anchor institutions like this university should lead with procurement practices that relocalize economic activity, build local multipliers, and end leakage and financial extraction. Within all these 5 pillars are various elements and strategies and tactics that are direct interventions that help democratize local economies from the ground up. Community wealth building isn't an abstraction, it's already a reality. It's spreading far and wide as a new model of economic development. We see it from Cleveland, Ohio, to the other side of the Atlantic in the United Kingdom, where there have been major advances in developing full-fledged community wealth building models across the entirety of the local economy. And what we see is a different set of outcomes. Instead of the ongoing concentration of wealth in the hands of a narrow elite, community wealth building allows us to pursue a broad dispersal of the ownership of assets. Instead of in different global markets, it's about rooted, participatory, democratic local economies. Instead of extractive multinational corporations, it's recirculatory, mobilizing large place-based economic institutions, local government, hospitals, educational institutions, in support of socially oriented enterprises that are often democratically owned and controlled by their workers in the community. The original model of community wealth building is the Evergreen Co-ops in Cleveland, Ohio. We can talk about them if we like in the discussion. We created Evergreen in response to the devastation of years of deindustrialization in Cleveland, which lost half its population, most of its Fortune 500 companies due to deindustrialization. In terms of poverty, it was second only among US cities to Detroit. But it still had these very large nonprofit and quasi-public institutions, such as the Cleveland Clinic, Case Western Reserve University, university hospitals, anchor institutions because they are rooted in place and aren't likely to up and leave as the private corporate sector had done. Together, these 3 institutions, themselves largely dependent on flows of public funds, favorable tax treatment and the like, were spending billions of dollars every year, but very little of it was going into the local community. So we work with the anchors, with the city, with the Cleveland Foundation to pursue a strategy to localize their procurement in support of a network of purposely created green worker co-ops, the Evergreen Co-ops, tied together in a community corporation. These include an industrial-scale ecologically advanced laundry, a large urban greenhouse, and a renewable energy company. We recently added a fund that pursues employee ownership conversions of existing businesses. These are linked by a community-serving nonprofit corporation and a revolving fund. And the Evergreen companies can't easily be sold outside of their network and return a percentage of their profits to help develop additional worker-owned businesses and grow the local economy. They provide living wage jobs for their worker owners who also receive a share of the profit. They keep money recirculating locally rather than seeing it extracted. The estimate of the multiplier from buying local in this manner is something like 8, which means that if you buy from a large multinational, the dollar leaves your community right away. But if you buy from a local business, it stays local and is spent a further 8 times, moving around in the economy, creating further economic activity. Today, the Evergreen companies are highly successful. They're beating out large multinationals for contracts from the anchors, and the model has really begun to spread far and wide. We've seen it taken up in the United Kingdom, where there are full-fledged models in Preston, in North Ayrshire, outside of Glasgow, and we're now seeing the Scottish government, the Northern Irish government, and others begin to take up community wealth building. We ourselves are engaged in conversations with housing and urban development in the federal government about how the US federal government can begin to adopt community wealth building as part of its economic development strategy. So this is a reality, and there's a real possibility of applying this model here in Northern Virginia. I want to recognize, in handing over to the rest of the panel for discussion, that these conversations are not new. We don't have to start them from scratch, but have been ongoing with the county, with the anchors like Mason and others, to really begin to think through what a strategy on community wealth building would mean for Northern Virginia, and how we can put rocket boosters on the potential for using procurement, investment, and the other tools that I listed for building a democratic economy that we need here in Northern Virginia. So let me stop there and hand back to Amy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate the framing of the broad crises at play and the ways in which they operate at multiple scales, and the ways in which you can harness at multiple scales too. So maybe that'll be a question we could explore a little bit more, but I'm going to turn things over to Carla Bruce to talk about how this would play out in Northern Virginia, especially given your long history of working at the county level, building this kind of infrastructure.
Great, thank you, Amy. It's really exciting to be here. And my role as Chief Equity Officer for Fairfax County government is really focusing on how we can make Fairfax County work for everyone. And so, across all measures of success, Fairfax County is a great place to live, learn, work, and play, but we know for sure that there are segments of our community, both populations and places, that aren't sharing in the same level of prosperity as their neighbors. And so part of our understanding of recognizing inequity is figuring out how we can ensure that those segments of our population, those areas of our population can again, participate in what we commonly know to be a very strong economy. So, when an economic model works for most people, it can become difficult to even recognize where it's not working and to, come up with strategies that don't disrupt what's working, but more add to or contribute in fill in gaps. And I think that that's the situation that we find ourselves in Fairfax County. Unlike other areas of the county where there are sort of fundamental changes that are necessary, we are really looking at filling gaps in getting people to participate in what we know to be a strong economy. So let me talk a little bit about what inequity looks like in Fairfax County. So, why I think my participation on this panel and the broader work of Democratizing NOVA is so significant to our equity strategy. So back in November of 2017, our Board of Supervisors, along with our school board, adopted what we call our One Fairfax Racial and Social Equity Policy. And in short, that policy commits the county government to consider equity in all of our planning and decision making. So as I said before, Fairfax County is a great place to live, learn, work, and play, but we recognize that there are certain populations in certain areas that aren't thriving or living to their fullest potential. And so what we have done is really identified those key areas where we want to affect change in order to not just close those gaps, but what we like to think of is boost opportunity and outcome for everyone. So there's really 5 areas: cradle to career success being one, from birth to the successful transition into adulthood, making sure that there are pipelines of opportunity and success. Community health and well-being, community safety and justice, equitable community development, really trying to fix that uneven landscape of opportunity. But all of those things really fit together to create what we think of as an inclusive economy and foster inclusive prosperity. And that, I think, is what equity looks like for us in Fairfax County. Now, to do that, we have to set broad goals for ourselves. And again, keeping in mind, we want to keep those things that are working for some to continue to work, but really targeting, understanding the vulnerability and lack of opportunity that exists, and targeting strategies that really aim to fill those gaps and address the that structural inequity that's blocking opportunity for so many in our community. That concept that we really follow is one called targeted universalism. This idea that we should, and as a jurisdiction, need to set broad goals for everyone in our community, right? We want success for everyone in our community, but we recognize that targeted strategies are needed that deal with what the creator of this concept of targeted universalism calls situatedness, right? People are situated differently in our community. People are situated differently in our society. And if we apply the same strategies without accounting for situations, then that is when we are leaving people behind and not fully sort of meeting the needs that folks have in order to live to their fullest potential. We also recognize the sort of intersectional nature of inequity, right? We recognize that, we look at inequity based on race. We look at inequity based on income. We look at inequity based on gender. We look at inequity based on ability. And we realize that, those things, people are not just one thing, right? They have different life experiences and different life situations. And so our strategies need to account for those differences in terms of people's situatedness. But what we find most predictably in Fairfax County across most indicators of life success is the factor that most predictably can be looked at in terms of guessing a person's ability to succeed is race and income. So those are the sort of chief factors that we consider as we think about these targeted strategies and sort of what we can do to build opportunity where it doesn't exist, to overcome barriers or create access to opportunity where it might exist, but people aren't able to access it, and then how we can structure opportunities in a way where we are creating what we call communities of opportunity across the county. So no matter who you are and where you live in Fairfax County, you have access to the opportunities that will enable you to thrive and live to your fullest potential. This is also very outcome focused, right? So one of the things that we have to think about are how are our systems working, right? And are our systems producing the outcomes that we would hope they would for everyone, not just, again, for what we intend things to do, but what are they actually doing? And having the ability to course correct and change in order for our efforts to be more effective. Now, in order to do that, we have to do that in partnership and in relationship with the other institutions that exist in Fairfax County. So we appreciate our partnership with George Mason University, but also in relationship with the residents themselves, right? The folks who are closest to the challenges and most often are best positioned to know what will work in their lives. And so we have also adopted what we think of as our inclusive community engagement framework, right? So that as we are operating the functions of government, we are doing so in a way that is based on including all of the voices fully that exist in Fairfax County, recognizing that people need to have the ability to inform what the problems are, how we prioritize them, but also what the solutions are. And so this notion of inclusive community engagement is a key principle of our broader equity strategy. In terms of our investments in the community and sort of embracing our role as an anchor institution, we have to look at how our dollars are spent, right? At one level, we want to make sure that our dollars are spent in a way that they're producing the results that we would like them to produce. So, earlier we talked about, on an earlier panel, we talked about, investing in things that work, investing in things that aren't just charity-based, but investing in things that actually are building community and building power and building leadership. So that's one way as an anchor institution that we have to sort of step into that role. We also have the ability to, spend dollars in the community, right? And so we are exploring ways that we can make sure that that Fairfax County's dollars are being regenerated in the community by working with local businesses and particularly with small businesses. But as an anchor institution, we have influence with other anchor institutions. And so we want to step into that role and look to the other institutional partners that exist in the county and encourage them to embrace and see that role as well. Because again, I think that that cumulative power is one that is really important, not just, again, the role of the county, but the role of universities, the role of our hospital system. And again, those of us who aren't going anywhere, right? We have roots in this community and therefore should take responsibility for creating the conditions for everyone, all residents in our community, to have success.
Thank you so much, Carla. You've given us a lot to think about. I really appreciate the strengths-based approach to community participation, right? That the communities often have, they have the resources within their communities to mobilize these kinds of efforts in partnership with anchor institutions. So we'll move to Mylan Tran, who has a lot to share and has a long history of working on immigrant-based enterprises and being an advocate for those. So I'll turn things over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Best. My name is Mylan Tran. I represent the State Economic Community Development Agency. It's called the Virginia Asian Chamber of Commerce. It was created, first of all, as an Asian American Business Assistance Center about 19 years ago. We are the first statewide Asian American Business Assistance Center, and we created that agency to respond to the demand of an emerging Asian American business existence in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Coming from a big influx of immigration from various parts of Asia coming to the USA in different waves with different needs. So we created that agency to engage the businesses, and today the Asian American is, I would say, a successful community, hardworking, like other communities with some challenges, and looking forward to new opportunities. I heard the Democracy Collaborative. I heard the perspective of the Fairfax County. I would say that because I have a generalist background and I have been privileged to work for the Commonwealth of Virginia through 4 governors, and from those times serving these government administrations since 1996, I have obtained an appreciation for how the Commonwealth see the region. I also had the opportunity to do extensive research on technology and the environmental in Northern Virginia and various regions in Virginia. On top of that, the perspective of working with small businesses since 2011, when we created our first Northern Virginia activities regional satellite in Chantilly and then in Vienna. So what I'd like to offer to you within 9 minutes is to share with you my perspective. Now, my perspective coming from a global perspective. Everywhere I go, I always look at solving a solution with a historical global perspective, because that's who I am. I'm an immigrant coming from Asia, studying in Europe. So I guess that my perspective always go back to the world. And I think that in front of this prestigious audience at academic perspective, I would say that you appreciate history. You appreciate the understanding, appreciation of global history around you. And what you see lately in the last few months, in Russia, they pick to you the importance of global history, to understand deeply how democracy has been developed and has been falling down slowly, a lot in Europe, a lot in Latin America, and also a lot lately in Asia. So I want you to continue to remember yourself, no matter where you go in your study, pursuing your degree, working for government, always have a global perspective to understand and appreciate democracy from a global perspective. Please don't tell me that I am being too far out, right? Because we live here, we got to think local. we have to think global. Why? Because it is the appreciation of global democracy that will help where you are become very democratic. Why? Because society that have wealth, wellness, people tend to live with a higher quality of life. So with that, I think that throughout my life, I have fought for those who have less opportunity, Asian American immigrant coming to this great country. And I spent my life helping them to realize, number one, opportunities, to speak up for them, advocacy for their lack of needs and challenges. And I asked the American mainstream to please remember, Asian American is a minority. It is not black and brown only. It is a minority with a lot of challenges. If you could take one Asian studies class to understand the diversity of Asian Americans, they have a lot of challenges. Not all of them have PhD, mathematicians or researchers. Many do not have a future, do not have a GED, literacy very low, culturally isolated, and high level of mental health. So these are the issues that community in Northern Virginia is suffering. And I'm here to advocate for them as much as I can. In any audience I try to remind people that they also need help. They are very diverse. Now, talk just a little bit about economic empowerment. In a nutshell, economic empowerment or lack of affect all small, underserved, diverse, minority, women-owned businesses. Asian American continue to be one of that group. In Northern Virginia, our organization have worked with several cities. Fairfax County, most of it. Fairfax County has a very progressive tool, the leaders that I work with in trying to do something about it. There is a lot of more work to do from all sectors in procurement, not just Fairfax County. And that is that global mindset that we need to introduce to those people in procurement, to people who make decisions about the dollar spent. They need to be better educated about community, culture, buying behavior, selling behavior. And also to realize that they are a small part of this equation, which is the policy. Policy need to be improved so that more just. Is there anything called just? No, never, right? It's never 50%. But could be improved with the procurement system in all localities, state, and a little bit on federal. Because federal government is doing better because they have a lot of data they have to meet. But in Virginia, data in regard to helping small minority business continue to be very poor, and we need to do something about it. And I look forward to working with George Mason to making a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Milan. We're going to turn things over to Guillermo Zamora, who joins us from the service SEIU, who's going to talk about how labor fits into this broad equation. We've touched upon lots of different points here, so thank you for running us out.
There needs to be more support for unions and unionizing workers. Unionized workers make over 30% more than their non-union counterparts. The pay gap in gender and race almost disappears in unionized workplaces. Unionized workers are able to have a due process in regards to disciplines and firings, so they're able to avert a very destabilizing effect of losing their job for incompetent managers, trumped up charges, what have you. There's a due process. They have a ability to push back. And also, society was also a lot more equitable when unions were stronger. At the peak of unionization, the pay gap between workers and CEOs was 1 in 35. When I was in college, it was 1 in 345. Now it's 1 in 1,200. So as unions declined, worker power declined, and so did their political power and their economic power. Um, and conversely, when you see unions like at an institutional place of power in Australia, when I was there 5 years ago, the minimum wage was $18, and there's a system called the award system where there's a board and people from labor and people from business come every year and decide what the new wage is going to be for a particular industry. And it was $18 in 2012, where we were still at $7.25. Union workers were able to got more. They made like $24 compared to $18. But even then, because unions were so influential or so ingrained into the structure of Australia, any work after 5 p.m. was time and a half. Any work on Sunday was double time. Those are more generous. Those are more generous state benefits or state laws than we have here in unionized contracts, right? So this is what happens when unions have real political power. The fight for 15, wages have been slowly being increased here and there, and the benefits have been non-union workers, and that fight has been done by the unions, by SEIU. So most benefits that we've achieved economically has been because of the labor movement. Conversely, because as we lose economic powers, because workers have lost power as well. So to increase the democracy, unions have to come back. In Europe, they even have a vote on, the boards of companies. So not only do workers have a say in wages and benefits and health and safety, they have a say in what kind of vehicles, Volkswagen's going to make. If, they have a say in emissions, stuff that's not just in their lane. They have a voice in the company that they work for. So it's a huge difference, and yeah, that's what needs to happen. And what the university could do, and how you could support as university students is the university should only hire responsible contractors that respect the workers' right to organize, and does not condone any intimidation of workers. And on that note, the GMU janitors are in the process of organizing here at GMU, and there's going to be a rally May 5th at Merton Hall at 12 p.m. if you want to come in and support. Thank you.
Guillermo, thank you so very much for your insights here. It's been interesting to listen to the different sort of organizational pathways to building community wealth building. And we know that it really is an all hands on deck kind of approach, which means that you're attempting to mobilize government entities, different kinds of grassroots organizations, whether you're talking about organized labor or other kinds of grassroots-based entities, a government at at the large federal level, but government also at the municipal and local level, as well as enterprise. And so I think we all know that each of those organizational entities can have like different views about how like what's the path to get us there. And so how do you think about the kinds of coalition work that needs to be done, or support of anchor institutions that needs to be done that enables us to sort of work across those differences in both viewpoints, in ideas about what the end goals might be, if community wealth building is a priority. And I feel that maybe go back to Joe, give you guys a little time since you spoke first.
Okay.
Put you on the spot.
Yeah, happy to kick off there. I think there's a couple of ways into that question. I think government has a unique role among all the different actors who need to collaborate and come around the table, because government is supposed to take the global view, the democratic view, that represent the community as a whole. But that won't happen unless there is actually demand coming from the community itself. And so if you're a citizen, if you're a student, if you no matter where you stand, I think one of the first places that to kind of approach this from is building demand. Because unless there's demand, systems don't change. And that doesn't have to be for nefarious reasons. That can just be inertias. It can be continuing practices. I don't think that the total answer to why procurement hasn't been a more powerful tool than it could be is because procurement officials are actively working against the common interest. I think it's more that you tend to default to what you know and to past practices, and it's easier. And if you know reliable contractors that you can do big contracts with and bulk them up and so on year in, year out, that's the obvious place to go. I think what we need to be doing, though, is bringing a sort of total balance sheet approach that really brings in not just the dollars and cents, but really takes into perspective the political, the social, the ecological, and that really only government is in a place to do that, and then the citizen themselves. There are multiple different roles that other actors can play in this, and each takes up their different part. Different types of businesses tend to behave differently. We know that local businesses are less likely to engage in pollution of their own communities, less likely to need to grow at all costs. Cooperatives, for example, tend to have a better trade-off between more free time for their workers versus pursuing ever greater profits, etc. So part of the result of building a different ecosystem of enterprise through procurement and investment and other tools that anchors have available is really starting to change the nature of the economy overall. And so I think it's not that everybody has to agree on everything, but it's that there needs to be some coordination and political leadership. And political leadership needs to be held to account democratically. And I think that's the place to start in terms of that coordinating, collaborating mechanism that's needed to get community wealth building going. So that puts Carla on the spot a little bit.
I'm ready too. Because what you just described is what we like to think of as our inside-outside strategy to achieve equity. We recognize that there are things that the government needs to do, but as you described, those things won't happen without public will. And so, we rely on this being a value in community that is advocated for. And I think as it is better understood, and our tagline for One Fairfax is we all do better when we all do better. So we're not only talking about the so-called impacted groups when we're talking about a shared community understanding and a shared value, that everybody understands that this is better for all of us when people are able to support themselves, support their families, and contribute meaningfully to their community. Now, one of the things that's important to think about, particularly from a local government perspective, are what's the legislative climate to support these types of actions. So there are things that should be done at the local level, and I can, proudly say in Fairfax County we are looking at what tools we have available at the local level. But much of our ability to act is based on the legislative environment created for us at the level of the Commonwealth. And so advocacy at the local level is important. Advocacy at the state level is important as well. That will enable some of the actions that have been described. This inside-outside strategy, though, I think is important in another way, because we can create policies and practices, but they have to be sort of informed by the community. And it's the community that gives us a sense of how the doors of opportunity have been open or closed to them. And so, making sure that as we are devising these policies and exploring these ways, that we're doing it in relationship with community is extremely important, because they have the firsthand experience of what's worked and what hasn't worked, and so having that inside-outside perspective is really important. The other thing is the shared community value, and that this recognition is that this is good for us all, right? Not just good for some, but good for us all. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to bring more people to the table. It's really reflective of the tipping point theory, right? I think there's some people that get it. I think there are some people that are in active opposition. And I think that there's a group of people in the middle who frankly just don't know, or know but don't know how to act, and what they can do to help move our community more in this direction. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done. Again, government can take action, but that action is really driven by the interests of the people, and moving that group in the middle that doesn't know or doesn't know how to act, I think is extremely important.
Thank you. Milan or Guillermo, would you like to field those questions, respond?
I've been on both sides of NIMBY fights, and I don't know. It's just respecting, the right of the community for health and safety, the right of organizers to organize, and business has to be able to exist in some form. So it's just recognizing that we all have to deal with each other, and government has to maintain some kind of order. So understanding those basic priorities for each one of those groups, I think, I don't know the answer, but it guides the discussion, or guides the path.
So my perspective is, within the last 30 years, the world, most of places in the world, right, except for the United States of America, have fallen down in terms of polarizing idea and a lot of conflict with each other. If you look at Latin America, you look at Asia, you look at Middle East and Africa, look at all the coup have been more like the last 6 months, you see like 5 coup, right? So with that perspective, make yourself a determination. So Northern Virginia or any other region in Virginia has already made a decision. We are a democratic society. So that's a good start. So I would say that with that determination, we're going to be a democratic society. Of course, this is like a year-long study. We can be here for a whole year. So may I just provide you with 2 elements for 3 areas I would like to give you an answer on how we can work together as a society. 1 would be the social political aspect of democracy. 2 would be the economic wealth distribution. And 3 would be leadership. And all under social political, the 2 things of action would be, number 1, having government have a better agenda, continue to develop just agenda in collaboration with the community. Number 2, making the economic, having a better or maybe an enhanced understanding and practice of economic development. The economic development of 30 years ago is no longer the new economic development. You're talking about investor coming here instead of helping more investor come in here, or should we help the entrepreneur that are already here? So existing industry, rather than going looking for that $1 million that may not happen, taking a lot of money from the state. Number 2, for the economic wealth distribution, may I suggest 2 ideas. That is, this is very hot topic and we all know that, corporate greed. Now, you know that it's all about money. That's how USA is being run. So with corporate greed or procurement, it's all about making money. How can we be benefits? That is really the main function of procurement, is to make money for the organization, either state government or federal. They are there to make money. So we need to make it better in order to be a just, well, democratic society. And the 3rd category, I would say leadership. Why? We have to listen better and have a better understanding of the young people. Because I don't think policymakers really understand the young people, and they are the new generation, right? They are the future. And they're going to bring this country to the next, so we have to engage them more. Listen to the new voices that do not have, their voice are not being heard. Immigrants, new people who are continuing to create this country. Thirdly, very important, information technology, because information technology, communications, these are things that affect positively or negatively the democracy. So I think that technology has a great role in making democracy works good or not. So in conclusion, George Mason University is a natural in position to continue to research, monitor how we're doing. And I think that we need to support the university and work together with the government. Thank you.
I appreciate your comments, and there's so much to take away from what you've been saying. For sure, some of the things that are sticking with me is one is sort of mobilizing the middle, a group who are sort of more neutrally situated, and the work that is involved there, and some of the redistributive and then collective efforts, and not, as Guillermo said, standing in the path of those collective efforts. But I also am really struck by your example from procurement of sort of the lack of collective imagination for organizations to imagine different paths forward for how they go about the business of doing whatever it is that they're doing. And organizations, I mean, when we talk about imagination, it's not just individual imagination, it's organizational imagination to reimagine possibilities forward. And then the last is the sort of just the climate in which we're sort of operating. So where levers of change can be accessed. Sometimes it is at a municipal level, sometimes it is at a state level, sometimes federal level, and sort of being nimble enough to move between them seems to be the order of the day. So I have a last question before we put it out to the audience for folks, if you want to take this question up, which is what are some of the lessons learned from both past successes but also past failures in the work to achieve community wealth, greater community wealth, so that when we talk about money, we're not talking about just money for the few, but we're talking about the kinds of wealth building that is collectively shared and collectively built. So lessons learned, from past or present?
Well, I will start with this, and it's not necessarily a lesson learned in terms of something that worked, but more of an aha moment. The idea of interdependence, right? So this polarization of the haves and the have-nots, and who was thriving and who was not. When we begin to rethink our situation and we realize that, particularly in Fairfax County, there's 1.2 million people in Fairfax County. In the most recent census, we're at about 50% white, and the balance of people of color, in that the growth in the county is among people of color and among young people. So we're talking about our future and who is going to be our future, and what do we need for them, right? So what do they need to be successful? But who are they to all of us, right? They're the people that are going to fill our jobs, right? They're the people that are going to produce the goods that we all need to thrive. They're the ones that are going to care for our elderly and our children. And so when you think, I hesitate to call it this way, but when you think of it from a selfish perspective, right? So even if you don't care about that group, if you realize your interdependence on that group, you should want to create a structure for them to not only be able to serve, but to do it at the highest level possible, right? To do it in the way that works best, not just from a quality perspective in terms of the service delivery, but from a quality of life perspective. And so back in 2015, we worked with the organization Policy Link, and Policy Link developed what was called the equitable growth profile of Fairfax County. They've done these for regions across the country. And they said that because people of color aren't fully participating in our economy, we're leaving $26.2 billion on the table, right? And that's not just hurting people of color. That's hurting everyone. And so this aha moment of interdependence is one that I really hope our community can come to understand, that it is good for you, it's good for them, that we really concentrate on this as the crisis that it is, because it will end up having negative consequences for everyone.
Yeah, thank you for that, sharing that. Looking at Joe, it looks like you have something to say.
Sure. In terms of some musings on lessons learned and what to carry forward, sort of 4 quick points: leadership, participation, scale, education. An agenda like this is difficult. It involves a lot of staying power. It's not glamorous. It's the sort of slow boring through hard boards that that one social scientist and political theorist talked about. And for that to happen requires staying power and vision and leadership over time. And what we've seen is that in virtually any area where there's a major community wealth building initiative underway that's gaining traction and having success and delivering the goods, that is in part through leadership. And leadership comes at different levels and at different scales. That often requires political leadership from the top, but then it also requires leadership from the anchors. It requires leadership from the community. It requires people getting up day in, day out, and realizing that they have to be in this for the long haul, because this isn't change you can bring about overnight. Participation, I think we have had to take some shortcuts with some of the models of community wealth building that were developed initially, because the idea was demonstration projects, get them stood up, make them happen. And so in some ways, there's been a kind of overly top-down aspect to some of the early prototypes of community wealth. And so the challenge for the next round is putting the community into community wealth building. There's been a lot of wealth and focus on ownership and on the institutions. There's been a lot of building and activity, but the community piece needs to go into there. Scale, I think it's time, given the crises I mentioned at the beginning, to go beyond projects and to really think about how we can get the mass of activity in a particular locality that begins to get you towards a different kind of tipping point, the tipping point in the economy where overall it begins to naturally produce, as and of its everyday operations, the kind of outcomes that Carla and her office are seeking, that aren't reliant upon correcting things after the fact. And you know, estimates in the UK, where we've done a lot of work, if you looked around in virtually any community, you could get to about 1/3 of the local economy if you began to add up the anchors and the local government presence and public education and the nonprofit sector and cultural institutions. That's an enormous wedge of any economy to begin to start moving towards that tipping point. And so making sure that this isn't about individual institutions working on their own with some sort of savior complex and thinking that they can go it alone, but actually the deep collaboration that's needed across all those institutions to get there. And lastly, education. I think one of the big barriers for that middle to begin to move is the stories that we carry in our heads. I think one of the things that the particular variety of neoliberal capitalism that we've got has done extraordinarily well is sell some very unlikely stories about the economy that we then carry around with us. The idea that a rising tide will lift all boats. The idea that if everyone acts in their own individual selfish interests, then somehow the general welfare will emerge out of that. And all sorts of other stories about efficiency, the respective roles of government and the private sector and so on. I think we need to create new stories and new understandings, and this gets us back to the role of a university in all of this. I think there are direct things that if you're a student at Mason, you should be, or a faculty member or an administrator, that you should be pushing for the institution to do with regards to procurement, with regards to workforce and supporting a much more equitable settlement for the workers here, but also an investment. But there's also the fundamental job of the university itself in terms of knowledge and learning, and beginning to think about a different story of economics and a different understanding of how economics relates to development, relates to ecology, relates to society. And I think the point at which the university is both acting as an anchor, but also, frankly, pushing the frontiers of this thought forwards. I think we get us a long way down the road to where we need to be in terms of being able to move those hearts and minds in that middle that are really going to take us towards that tipping point.
Yeah, I can say in terms of the next system studies work sort of unfolding and beginning to emerge here, and thinking about training a next generation to be able to undertake this work is a critical part, and then also thinking about how you scale it. So it's not just one university that's doing it, but this is something that is institutionalized across universities as a critical component. Guillermo and Milan, would you like to add to this?
Persistence, institutional, individual persistence. The wages at DCA in Dulles 5 years ago were at $7.25, or a little bit less, $6.15, because we're tip workers. It's been that way for forever since the minimum wage was determined in 1997. But the workers stood up. There was a lot of political lobbying, but mainly the workers started participating and speaking up, and taking their stories public. And it was a 2-year fight, a lot of stuff, but now wages are at $14.25, and they're going to go up to $15 next year. And we're working on getting benefits. Thank you. Right here in the university, we beat one bad contractor, got removed, but the university just brought in another. But the workers, it's the same workers, they're still fighting, so they're going to beat that one too. So it's just persistence of the individuals and an institutional persistence to the cause.
Yeah, just again, very adamant about the role of policymakers, ideology that come from that, because unless you have a new ideology, progressive thinking, accepting new economic development reality, and COVID really did something to the world, really, to the U.S. So I think it's a great opportunity to make a bold revolution. Right? And I think that what is better than the role of the university as a think tank, but we have to be more bold, because next system and the community wealth building, had I not been involved with the Community Foundation of Northern Virginia, I would not know about your work. But I think we need to do more in order to get the public attention and the policymakers' attention. Thank you.
Yeah. It speaks to the participatory models for building that at all levels. So we have a few minutes left. I wanted to put some questions out to folks who've been listening, and see if folks have any questions to follow up on, or comments from our wonderful group of presenters.
That's it. I think y'all can hear me, right? What are all the benefits that institutions get from unionized workers?
The employers get, or institutions? Well, less turnover, one thing. Unionized workers have a better pay, better benefits, they're happy on the job, so they stay longer. Lower turnover means that, the people that work in the institutions they've been around longer, they know the job, they have an appreciation for the job, they're happier in the job, so that also, you feel that as a student, as a professor that works in these buildings. There's tax credits for, giving, donating money to unions' education fund or training funds. There's like tax credits. But main thing is that the workers are happier and their lives are more stable, so you see less turnover. And less turnover is generally better for an employer or for any kind of institution.
Hi, I also had a question kind of about, unions. How do we deal with things like retaliation when it comes to unionization? I think that's, certainly something that we've seen with like Starbucks Workers United, and I believe one of the Starbucks stores in Falls Church actually just won their union election, which is great. But I know that there's kind of just been like a wholesale, campaign against unionization at Starbucks, hiring a lawyer that specializes in like contingency issues with labor and stuff like that. So I guess, how do we reckon, with like just the state of retaliation, and how do we just build worker power in that way?
It's tough. U.S. labor law is a paper tiger. If it's the worker's responsibility to prove that the employer terminated them for reasons unrelated to union activity. I mean, for union activity, while the employer can say you were late, I didn't have enough room on the roster, whatever. And if you win the charge, the only consequences for the employer is that they have to put up a notice on in the break room or somewhere public saying that I broke labor law, and they have to hire back the worker back with lost wages, unless the worker took another job in the meanwhile to get by. Then it's what they would have earned minus what they actually earned in their new job. So no consequence. If the only consequence to robbing the bank was saying I robbed the bank and not even having to give the money back, everyone will be a bank robber. You just have to work harder. This is why unionization is down, and this is even though the majority of workers want unions, it's still uphill because it's a very one-sided fight. The employer has access to you, has access to the workers the entire shift. The union only has, the ability to talk to workers, outside of work, and what the workers can talk, amongst themselves, amongst the job. So it is hard, but and it's always uphill. Like every union fight is a David Goliath situation. So it's amazing when we win, and it's and the support and enthusiasm. That's how we beat the odds. But it is hard. Yeah. And the solution is an improved labor law, real consequences for employers for retaliation. That's what the PRO Act, and before that, the Employee Free Choice Act, a couple of years we're supposed to do, but those keep on dying.
Hi, my question is for Carla. So you spoke about the One Fairfax initiative or project, as well as targeted universalism, which I thought was really interesting. I hadn't heard that before. I'm wondering how this plays out in the public schools, and if that's not what you're involved in, forgive me. I know this has been a lot of talk around businesses, but I just wondered if you had some insight into that.
I can talk a little bit about target universalism, but public schools. So I'm the Chief Equity Officer for Fairfax County Government. And while the school board did adopt the One Fairfax policy, they also have a Chief Equity Officer specific to school outcomes and school strategy. So I can't speak so much about how that plays out in the school system. In general, though, as a concept, it is built around the idea of universalism, that there are certain things that we as a society expect for everyone. But if not everyone is positioned to achieve that, universal goal or ideal, recognizing because of structural racism specifically, in structural inequity, how can we, implement targeted strategies specifically informed to address what is the structural inequity that a particular population or area is facing. And we really think that concept application across all policy areas makes sense, particularly for an area like Fairfax County.
With elections coming up in 2022, I thought it might be worth reminding ourselves. I thought about this a little bit when Milan Tran was talking about how committed the United States is, as opposed to some other places in the world, to democracy. But I think, we almost had a coup, January 6, 2020. I don't think that threat has gone away necessarily. So when we think about the kinds of conflicts that we're facing, and in light of this concept of situatedness, that Carla was talking about, I also think it's important to stress not just local community wealth building, but thinking about this in translocal terms. There are a lot of communities that are interested in the ideas we're talking about today that, because of their being differently situated, will engage in these sorts of democratic experiments in different ways and learn lessons from those that we need to be sharing with each other, I think. And so I'm wondering, as we also think about ways to democratize these technologies that we're using, have you been thinking about how we might be able to use them to build translocal and transnational networks of sharing and communication, the things we're learning, so that we can strengthen each other, use each other as a resource to deepen democracy in our local communities?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely critical. We're not going to get where we need to be in the system as a whole by moving forward one Cleveland or Preston or even Chicago at a time. There has to be rapid learning and transmission. And part of the good news is actually, as we're seeing these models develop and adapt and grow more ambitious, that people are covering the ground in less time. And you don't have to start from zero. You can start from the point of learning of previous models and so on. But we do need to build that translocal transmission of knowledge, learning, and cooperation. We need to build some of it anew, and we need, frankly, to put it through existing networks. I know there's going to be a conversation in the workshops afterwards around the solidarity economy, which already has a very well-developed national and international network. There are groups like the Transnational Institute that are looking at pieces of this agenda on a global scale. A lot of these models are kind of new in the particular wrapping and packaging and ways in which they've come together, but built on some very old forms like the cooperative that goes back as long as humanity in one way, shape, or form, and certainly back to the 19th century in its current forms. And there are other networks that we need to be pulling together and figuring out how to share and talk. On the technological side, that is not my strength, and so I am all ears to learn about how we ought to be building that in. Certainly on the basis of the models, we're seeing technological applications. Forms like Uber are essentially extractive forms from community, but we're seeing municipalities look at how to develop local platforms that would allow for cooperatives of local drivers that could come together and use them, and once again keep wealth recirculating locally rather than seeing it extracted. How we use the technology in the politics, I need to learn rather than teach in that regard.
I would just, in terms of the translocal piece, I think one of the things that's important is to recognize the root causes and the drivers of the situations that we're facing. I think many localities, the one I work for included, see problems and on behalf of the community want to address them, not always taking into consideration that the roots of those issues are not really things, not always things that have been produced by our local situation. And so there is some benefit to looking outside of our borders for opportunities, one, for what's working, right? So we're not starting from scratch, we're really building on the successes of others, and for partnership and leverage, because many of the institutions, while we talk about anchor institutions, in this community wealth building space, what we're fortunate to have here, particularly in this region, are institutions that have a presence in other parts of the country. And so how can we sort of draw sort of what's working from their presence in other parts of the country to work for us in our location, sort of being the headquarters. Sometimes things get focused outwardly versus what can we do to leverage those things to make them work for us locally.
In regards to the national procurement system, that Northern Virginia or Central or Southwest Virginia, we all are educated. Because I'm educated in procurement, so I can say we, our community, follow the National Institute of Management, which is the way procurement is done. And that system has no consideration to any barrier of any people who minority business and the people who need to be treated fairly. Because when I took the training, I look at the curriculum, it has nothing to do with society, community, understanding. It's all pure profit. And it can be very brutal, okay? It's very straightforward, cold, calculating. That is procurement. And unfortunately, all the council on procurement, how to run business in America, follow that system. So we really need a revolution, a systematic change on how the U.S. is doing business, because Northern Virginia is only one portion of that buying system that everybody is learning from. So I think just on procurement, definitely we need a lot of work. And this, it's a process, so we should just talk about it and influence these national association. These are national association, and who are they? They are the corporate leaders. They get together and they make the decision on how corporate purchase from business. Then when about 10 years ago supply diversity was introduced, it's only talk, because it doesn't do anything. It doesn't make any difference. It just look good, just looking good, but it's a long way to go. So.
Well, thank you so much to this wonderful panel. I've learned so much.
I want to really thank all of you for the insights and the thought that you brought to the conversation today. Thank you, Dr. Best, for chairing. Thank you for the work each of you do on a daily basis. I think it's probably evident to everybody here just how much you put into your labor on behalf of all of our communities, and really appreciate that. And it feels good to know that we're working in tandem and that relationships are being built, conversations are being opened up, some possibilities I think could now seem visible. And thanks again to all of you. To all of you, it's been really a wonderful step forward today. And congratulations to everybody who put work into this.
We're bringing people into the room to meet each other who are engaged in democratization initiatives in Northern Virginia, with the idea being that by sort of sharing space, exchanging experience, ideas, that connections will be made, and we can begin to put together a network through which the university, the county, and communities can come together and get to the point where we have enough capacity to plan a transition in the region. And when I say transition, I mean a transition to an economy and a political system that meets real needs that people have in the community. We want to see more and more of our graduates going into forms of business, of organizing, of community service that build up a comprehensive next system in the region.